Chapter 7. Jack. There was a flash as the world abruptly stopped racing up at Jack's feet, and he found himself standing on a bed of pine needles, a stone's throw from the precipice of a rocky cliff. The sun was hot, the air was clean, and the turkey in his hand had just lost its mind. The turkey bellowed, flapping so wildly that it finally freed itself from Jack's grip and sprinted away, looking back to see if Jack was pursuing it. Which was too bad. If it had been looking forward, maybe it wouldn't have run straight off the cliff. Jack watched as the turkey disappeared. As someone who had hunted quite a bit in his youth, he was well aware that unlike wild turkeys, domesticated ones couldn't fly. "Good riddance," he muttered. Sticking his hands on his hips, Jack's attention was drawn to the strange feel of the fabric beneath his fingers. Looking down, he saw that his earthen clothes had been replaced with items made of some sort of rough, homespun cloth like his mother had made in his youth. It was a decent cut and gave him a welcome sense of nostalgia. He could also feel the weight of a rucksack on his shoulders, which was good. This would be easier with some supplies. Jack took in his surroundings. "I have no goddamned idea where I am," he muttered. Not that it changed anything. No point knowing where you were if you didn't know where you were going. Jack thought through his situation. Between that green idiot's yammering and his great-granddaughter's exhaustive descriptions of whatever games she was playing over the years, the kid probably didn't even realize he was paying attention. It seemed reasonable to expect that he had some sort of character sheet, as she'd called it. And if he remembered correctly, the lizard said it would be in something called a tome. There was a faint popping noise as a book appeared in the air in front of Jack. It was unexpected, but no weirder than half a dozen other things that had already happened that day, so Jack took it in stride. He grabbed the book and looked at it closely. The tome was simple. Just a beaten-up diary. Not like one of the fancy modern ones with flowers and crap where people moaned about how nobody understood them. A good, sturdy diary like the one he'd had during the war. In fact, it looked exactly like the diary Jack had during the war, right down to the worn leather cover with the year embossed on it. It even had scorch marks that matched the ones his diary had received when Barty lit Jack's pack on fire during one of the man's idiot pranks. Other than the scorch mark, it was hardly a reminder of pleasant times. "Guess that's how that works," Jack muttered, as he tossed the diary aside and watched it disappear. He didn't need to look at it right now. Hell, he probably wouldn't understand it regardless. What was more important was getting a handle on the situation, and right now, something felt off. Jack looked around. He stared off into the distance and to the ground at his feet. Then he peered at the spot where the turkey had gone off the cliff. Nope, his mind wasn't playing tricks on him. His vision was fuzzy and not in the way he was accustomed to. Curious, Jack took off his glasses. The world exploded into a clarity Jack hadn't experienced since he was in his 20s. If anything, the world was clearer than he remembered. "Ain't that a treat?" Jack said, chuckling to himself. Pretty handy, not having to worry about breaking his glasses on this weird planet. Now, in better spirits, Jack swung off his backpack and took a knee in the pine needles. That was when he got his second big surprise. "What the hell?" he muttered. Jack stood, then knelt again, then stood, then knelt. He stood and did a few jumping jacks, then some stretches. Every movement was pain-free. Even his thoughts had more clarity. Bringing up the tome he had dismissed earlier, Jack took it and opened to the first page. "John Jack Milsom. Renown, Level 1, Unclassed. Species, Human. Age, 95. Experience, 0. Experience to next level, 300. Base attributes. Strength, 20. Constitution, 22. Endurance, 24. Dexterity, 21. Willpower, 24. Intelligence, 19. Charisma, 13. Luck, 32. Average, 21.9. Jack tried to work out what the numbers meant. Based on the first 4 values, he guessed that the 19 for intelligence and the 13 for charisma weren't great. That was fine. He never claimed to be the smartest man, and he knew he rubbed some people the wrong way. That didn't bother him. He didn't suffer fools and had no regrets about the fact. But that 32 in luck seemed an outright slap in the face. He'd buried a wife and a daughter, both in the prime of their lives. What did life look like in this world for someone with bad luck? Grumbling, Jack flipped through the diary's empty pages until he came to a tab labeled Traits. Opening it up, he was greeted with a description that read, Traits. Well-aged. Special. This trait renders you immune from negative effects associated with old age. Evolving. Human. As a human, you are capable of evolving into higher life forms. This requires a gift of essence from the target species and satisfaction of a species-specific quest chain. This trait is not lost upon evolving to a new form. However, subsequent evolutions must be to a more elevated form. On the next page, there was a tab labeled Conditions. Conditions. Muscular atrophy. Stage 5. -10 strength. Immune. Aged appearance. Stage 4. -4 charisma. Immune. Stooped. Stage 5. -3 charisma. -5 strength. Immune. Arthritic. Stage 4. -4 dexterity. -5 constitution. Immune. Flexibility loss. Stage 4. -6 dexterity. Immune. Thin skin. Stage 4. Prone to bruising and abrasions. Immune. Optical degeneration. Stage 3. -3 constitution. -3 will. Immune. Not dead yet. Stage 3. +5 luck. Osteoporosis. Stage 1. -5 constitution. Immune. Mental degeneration. Stage 1. -2 intelligence, -2 wisdom. Immune. Memory loss. Stage 1. 10% memory loss. Immune. Prone to nod. Stage 4. 60% increase in tendency to fall asleep throughout the day. Immune. Dental health. Stage 4. 60% loss of teeth. Additional damage to remaining teeth. Immune. Hearing loss. Stage 5. 80% hearing loss. Immune. Loss of smell. Stage 6. Complete loss of smell. Immune. Balance loss. Stage 3. -3 dexterity. Prone to falling. Immune. Additional memory loss due to conscious memory repression. Condition has been resolved. That certainly answered a lot of questions. No wonder Jack felt better than he had in half a century. The item, stooped, particularly caught his eye. Stretching up to his full height, Jack was surprised to discover that he could hold himself upright again. "That'll be handy," he muttered, nodding to himself. He skimmed over the rest of the items, running his tongue over a brand new set of real teeth. Then he popped out his hearing aid and grinned again. He closed his eyes and took a moment to smell the crisp pine air and listen to the sounds of a living forest. The tiniest crack of a breaking branch brought Jack's head whipping around. An animal slunk out of the woods. It was dog-like and lanky, not burly like a wolf, with long legs and a mangy appearance. Coyote. Not the first time Jack had seen one, but this was probably the worst-looking specimen he'd ever encountered. Its hair was matted. One of its ears had almost been torn off in some long-ago battle, and it was so skinny that its ribs were showing. A small page of paper flashed off to the side of Jack's vision and then disappeared. Once it was gone, a strange feeling surged through Jack's mind, as though he'd just stepped out of a briefing on this particular opponent and could remember every word perfectly. Threat assessment. Level 1, starving coyote. The target has been ill and unable to hunt. As a result, she is weak but motivated. If she can kill you, she will soon regain her strength, so she has risked everything on an all-or-nothing strategy. Good luck, soldier. Only one of you is making it out of this alive." You gotta be kidding me, Jack thought. Not only was it weird as hell, but the tone of the message was more like an old war movie than actual warfare. Was every interaction with this screwed-up world going to be that annoying? "All right, girl. Easy there," Jack said to the coyote as it stalked towards him. "I get that you're not doing so well, but I ain't such easy pickings, and I'd rather not start killing things. I will if I have to, but only as a last resort." The coyote ignored Jack's words, continuing to stalk him in a circle that elicited a sigh from Jack. "Have it your way." Grabbing the backpack, Jack held it in one hand and moved in a circle, mirroring the coyote's movements. He scanned the area for a makeshift weapon and saw a large stick that he could hold in one hand. It was gnarled and a bit bent, but it had a lump at the end that would make it into a serviceable club. Not ideal, but it would have to do. The coyote lunged toward Jack in a feint, but he wasn't fooled, and instead used the opportunity to shift himself over to where the stick was, scooping it off the ground and standing firm against the coyote, stick and backpack wielded like sword and shield. "Last chance, girl," Jack said. "I mean it. Hell, if all you want is a meal, you should just make your way to the bottom of that there cliff. Should be a nice, juicy turkey waiting for you." The coyote's response was to leap at Jack, but the old soldier wasn't about to be caught by surprise. Tossing the backpack into the animal's face, Jack took advantage of the animal's momentary confusion and smashed the club down on her head, causing the coyote to whimper and retreat. It wasn't enough to outright kill the animal, but it was sufficient to take the fight right out of her. The coyote stumbled in a circle, then dropped to the ground and put her head under her paws. "I told you, girl. I didn't want to do that," Jack said. He put his hands on his hips and scowled at the coyote. Little slips of paper kept appearing in the air, and it was annoying the hell out of him, so he just kept waving them aside. Once that stopped, Jack retrieved his backpack and finally looked inside. It wasn't much, but there were more than enough rations, especially considering that he was in a forest that seemed like it might have some decent forage. Glancing at the coyote again, Jack pulled out 2 of the packages of rations and dumped the contents on the ground in front of the coyote. "You eat those and get lost. Hear me?" he muttered. The coyote looked at him distrustfully, then nudged the food with her mouth. Gingerly taking a bite of the hard, beige substance, the animal quickly switched to gobbling it up. Jack shook his head at his own behavior and sat down on a log. The coyote was still there, but they were both well aware of who was the alpha. She would leave him alone. Putting the coyote out of his mind, Jack focused on the task of survival. The first thing he did was clear an area of dirt in a sunny patch of ground, then stick his camp knife in the dirt, point down. Taking a pebble, he placed it on the ground at the tip of the knife's shadow. Once that was done, Jack set about seeing what supplies had been included in his pack. There was rope, which was good, as well as some fishing line. The spool was small, but the low gauge suggested okay length, probably 50 meters. By his guess, it was maybe 10-pound test, good enough to grab a trout or bass if he found some decent water. Hopefully, he wouldn't hook anything bigger than that, or it could snap the line and make off with it. And if that did happen, well, maybe he'd live long enough to come back and do some proper fishing. The rest of the bag was simple survival gear, nothing too special, so he sealed up the backpack and settled it onto his shoulders. Now he just had to head roughly northwest to get to Palmyre, which meant finding out which direction was northwest. Enough time had elapsed for the shadow of Jack's knife to move, so he took another pebble and placed it where the shadow's tip now rested. Pulling the knife out of the ground, Jack used it to draw a line in the dirt through the 2 pebbles, which created a line that he now knew was running roughly east-west based on the direction of the shadow's movement. He then bisected that line with a perpendicular one and designated its points as north and south. Another one of those damn papers appeared in the air. and Jack decided he should probably read at least one of them to find out what they were all about.
New general skill learned. Orienteering. Level 24. Tier 2.
Hey! You need to read these things! I've been writing all kinds of witty stuff. You're not supposed to just ignore it.
Tier 1 bonus. Inherent sense of north and south when outdoors. Tier 2 bonus. Inherent understanding of your location relative to a target location. 3,950 XP earned. Cumulative.
Really? These things were just notices telling him what he already knew? Jack batted the paper aside and resolved not to bother with them anymore. He had more important things to deal with. Now that his compass points had been established, Jack set about defining some landmarks. There was a mountain range far off to the north and another one to the east, as well as another solitary mountain south by southeast that he could probably rely on for some directional sense. So long as the tree cover didn't get too dense, the land itself seemed to slope towards the northwest as well, at least at this point. He couldn't rely on that, though, so he used his makeshift compass to point himself northwest, then identified 3 trees off in the distance that were growing roughly in a line. Walking to the closest one, he stopped and once again sighted 3 trees in a line, using the latter 2 from the first set and adding a third, farther one. It was a boring-as-hell way to walk through a forest, but it would at least keep him from walking in circles. And if he hit some sort of natural barrier, well, he'd just have to go around, take a new reading, and do it all again. Lather, rinse, repeat until he hit Pallmeyer. It was time to go home. The turkey clucked throatily as she flailed her legs, wedged upside down in a small pine that jutted precariously out of the cliff face. 10 meters below her stood a cougar, who had noticed the commotion and now paced back and forth in anticipation of her forthcoming snack. The turkey, however, remained oblivious, thanks to the dirty newsprint that hovered directly in front of her face.
Turcoletta Milsom Sullivan. Renown, Level 1 Poultry. Species, Turkey. Age, 15 weeks. Experience, 50. Experience to next level, 250. Base attributes. Strength, 2. Constitution, 2. Endurance, 1. Dexterity, 1. Willpower, 1. Intelligence, 1. Charisma, 1. Luck, 3. Average, 1.5.
The turkey repeatedly pecked at the paper, but it kept appearing and disappearing with every movement of her head. Finally, her upside-down position became more annoying than the paper, and she sought to right herself. But the tree kept bouncing with every movement. Eventually, the chaotic flapping of the turkey's wings brought her feet into contact with the base of the tree, and she clawed frantically at the cliff face, inadvertently knocking free the clumps of dirt and rock that secured the tree's roots. The loose soil fell onto the face of the cougar below, but she didn't care. A bit of dirt was a small price to pay for a full belly. Hopping up on her hind legs, the cougar put her paws on the cliff and strained towards the turkey as though that tiny bit of proximity would cause her meal to arrive quicker. Eventually, the turkey's incessant digging became too much for the precariously situated pine. Roots began tearing out of the cliff face one by one, and with each loss of support, the process accelerated until finally, the tree broke loose and plummeted downwards, bearing the turkey with it. Unfortunately for the cougar, this happened at precisely the moment when some dirt had fallen in its eyes, so it didn't see the tree plummeting towards it at an alarming rate.
You have slain a Level 8 cougar matriarch.
Unmonitored legend. No kudos necessary.
4,000 XP earned. Renown level up. Level 2 achieved. Renown level up. Level 3 achieved. Renown level up. Level 4 achieved. Renown level up. Level 5 achieved. XP 4,050. XP to next renown 1,050. Strength +1. Endurance +1. Dexterity +1. Willpower +1. Luck +2.
Non-sentient species. Base attribute change not allowed.
Strength -1. Endurance -1. Dexterity -1. Willpower -1. Luck -2.
Animal growth process not permitted. Tome present. Conflict requires celestial intervention to prevent possible edge case scenario. Contacting celestial representative. Carl. No celestial response. Edge case scenario unresolved.
The turkey spasmed wildly, her feathers puffing out as some outside force ran through her. When the moment passed, she got to her feet and deliberately pushed the paper aside. After determining that no other threats were present, she extricated herself from the tree and bounded off into the forest. Chapter 8. Peter. The moment Peter's broken form appeared on the ground, Beth darted over to his side.
Peter!
She shouted. She couldn't see an obvious wound, but the pool of blood on the ground was growing larger. Reaching a tentative hand underneath her husband's back, she was shocked to discover a mass of torn flesh beneath his torn shirt.
Oh, honey, come on! You've got to wake up!
Peter's eyes flicked open and looked over to her, but they were milky and lacking focus.
Can't feel,
he wheezed, his voice barely more than a breath. There was blood on his lips that bubbled out as he spoke.
It's going to be okay. I've got something that will help.
Or so she hoped. She looked at the potion Verna had given her. Was she supposed to pour it on him? Make him drink it? Considering the size of the wound, there was no way she could cover it with the tiny amount of liquid in the bottle.
I'm going to give you something to drink, okay?
She said.
It'll help, I think. I'm pretty sure it's magical.
Despite how much pain he was in, Peter's mouth still managed to turn up in a brief smile. He looked at her and very deliberately blinked once. Beth assumed that meant he was ready to drink the potion. There was no way Peter would be able to drink while lying flat on the ground, so Beth heaved him up into a semi-sitting position, ignoring his wince of pain as she positioned him on her lap. She gave him an apologetic smile as she pulled the cork on the vial.
Sorry. I think this might hurt.
Beth poured the liquid into her husband's mouth. She was worried he might not be able to swallow it, but he gulped it down without hesitation. Now she just had to wait. The effects were almost instantaneous. No sooner had his head tilted back than he jerked sharply and rolled over, falling out of Beth's lap. There was a grinding sound as a disturbingly large dent in his back reformed into a proper position, followed by the open wound pushing out the dirt that had gotten into it, then sealing shut. As soon as the visible damage was healed, Peter erupted into a fit of coughing that left the ground in front of him covered in blood. It was so bad that Beth grew concerned he might have punctured a lung that the potion couldn't heal. But soon his coughing faded, leaving him on his hands and knees, panting furiously. Eventually, he managed to turn to her and give a weak smile.
What was that you gave me? I thought I was dead.
It was in my backpack,
she said, showing him the vial.
Along with a note saying that something had happened to you during your trip to the planet. What did happen?
Peter's eyes darted around as he visibly struggled for a coherent answer.
I don't know. I was falling, and I was looking at something. Then there was a flash of pain, and the next thing I knew...
He shrugged.
Maybe I hit something?
She sat back on her heels and looked at him with concern.
If you were falling anywhere near as fast as I was, you would have landed as a red mist, not a bleeding man.
I don't know what to say. It's a mystery to me.
Beth's brow furrowed.
Me too. Whatever happened, though, you're alive, and thank God for that. I wouldn't want to be doing this alone.
She did her best not to think about how, so far as she knew, the rest of the family was doing this alone. Hopefully, they had somehow gotten paired up as well. But something told her that wasn't the case. She shook her head, trying to move on from the terrible thought.
We should get going. I got a message earlier saying there were dangerous creatures around here, and it seems to me that a blood-covered clearing isn't a good place to hang around.
Peter's brow pulled together.
What do you mean you got a message?
Oh,
she exclaimed, realizing that Peter hadn't experienced any of the Arenian oddities yet.
They come from your tome of knowledge. You know, like Carl mentioned?
Carl?
Yes, the lizard man from our living room.
His name is Carl?
Yes. Do try to keep up,
Beth said, giving him a wink to let him know she was kidding.
All you need to do is will your tome to appear, and poof, it's there. Like this.
Beth held out her hand, and her tome appeared. She grabbed it and waved it at him. Peter opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, a second book materialized, this time in front of him, no doubt the product of him thinking about it. Peter hesitated, then took hold of the book. Or maybe ledger was a better term. Beth recognized it as the kind of accounting ledger her husband used when he did the books for the farm. They always ended up getting beaten up from him walking around with them. Beth kept bugging him to stick to digital, but he refused, insisting on a physical copy as well. Not because he was sentimental, mind you. It was because he was paranoid about getting audited by the government. A lot harder to refute a physical book than a computer file.
Perfect,
Beth said.
If you look inside, there should be a page that shows your attributes. I believe that's what they're called.
Okay, Peter said. He opened it and leafed through the pages once, then returned to the beginning. This is what you're talking about, right? He turned his book around to show her. For a moment, it was blank. Then, words appeared.
Peter Sullivan. Renown, level 1. Unclassed. Species, human. Age, 44. Experience, 0. Experience to next level, 300. Base attributes. Strength, 20. Constitution, 18. Endurance, 14. Dexterity, 19. Willpower, 15. Intelligence, 19. Charisma, 14. Luck, 19. Average, 17.3.
Any idea what this stuff means? He asked.
Not really,
she said. Maybe by comparing them, it would shed some light on the topic.
Your strength and constitution are much better than mine. Not that I'm terribly surprised.
She gave him a sly grin and a nudge, causing him to roll his eyes.
Your charisma is a bit lacking, though. Maybe we need to get you some etiquette classes?
Why? What's yours? Peter said.
Mine's 23.
23? Peter said. Christ on a bike. Thank God the Milsom women don't pick their men for their charming personalities.
I was 19 years old. I started dating you because of your muscles, not because of your personality,
she teased.
I certainly wasn't planning on keeping you around.
Good thing I knocked you up, Peter said, shaking his head. Thank you, Jose Cuervo.
You're a doofus,
Beth said. She punched him in the shoulder, then stood and got her bag. When she turned back around, she saw Peter staring at a mountain off in the distance with a dark look on his face.
Is something wrong?
Peter looked back at her and smiled, dropping the melancholy expression. You mean, aside from the whole family being transported to a bizarre game planet? Nope. Other than that, I'm fine. He pointed to the mountain. I saw that mountain when I was falling. It was somewhere to the southeast of here. I'm thinking that if we keep it behind us and just off to the right, that would have us traveling roughly north.
And since this Paulmeyer place seems to be a fairly large city, there should be roads leading to it,
Beth said, finishing his thought.
Even if we miss the city, maybe we'll hit a road and can follow that the rest of the way. Sounds like a plan.
They did a quick inventory and discovered that while Peter's backpack had not been damaged, it must have materialized after his injury. It unsurprisingly lacked the potion that had been in Beth's. It did include an extra shirt that Peter could change into, though, which was good, considering his current one was a shredded mess. Once settled, they began their journey through the woods. Beth left everything in her backpack, but Peter looped the camp knife onto his belt, just in case. They both knew it was more for comfort than anything else. The tool was one of the worst camp knives Beth had ever seen, and was probably useless in a fight with anything tougher than a potato. Even then, she'd put even money on the potato. They headed into the woods, following Peter's advice and keeping the mountain behind them on their right. The forest around them wasn't as barren as in Southern California, but the ground cover often broke open into bare sheets of rock, which allowed them to set a decent pace on their journey. After about 20 minutes of walking, both Beth and Peter were surprised when pieces of paper appeared in front of each of them. Beth's was very polite, appearing off to the side so as not to obscure her vision, whereas Peter's flitted directly in front of his face and caused him to trip over a root. Much to Beth's surprise, she didn't even need to read the page to understand what it said.
New survival skill learned. Hiking. Skill level 5. Tier 0.
The great outdoors. Since this skill predates your arrival in Arenia, it has been set at a level commensurate with the practical ability you already possess.
250 XP earned. Cumulative.
Oh, I got a hiking skill. Level 5, Tier 0,
Beth said. She glanced over at Peter as he picked himself up off the ground, grabbing the paper out of the air once he was back on his feet. When he finished skimming the contents, he looked at her in confusion.
I got the same thing, but mine is level 16, Tier 1? Why would they be different?
It actually didn't surprise Beth all that much, given what had happened with her yoga skill.
I'm pretty sure it's based on our lives back on Earth. You went hiking more when we were younger, so yours unlocked at a higher level.
He nodded and was about to say something when another piece of paper appeared in front of him. He looked it over and frowned.
I'm confused again. Now it says I'm level 3. Didn't it just say I was level 16?
Beth patted him on the arm.
Your hiking skill is level 16. Your overall level, what they call your renown level, is level 3. Congratulations.
Okay. What's your renown level?
Beth took out her journal and looked at it.
I'm renown level 5. Darn, I need 900 more experience points to get to level 6. How am I supposed to do that?
A pensive look came over Beth's face. She gave Peter a sly grin.
Peter? I'd like to test a theory.
Stepping close to him, Beth wrapped her arms around Peter's neck and pulled his head down into a long, deep kiss. At first he was surprised. Then he readily joined in.
New general skill learned. Pickpocket. Skill level 1. Tier 0.
Aren't you the sly minx? Someone is starting to get her head around how this world works.
50 XP earned.
It worked!
Beth shouted. She pulled back from a now confused Peter and dangled his camp knife in front of him.
I distracted you and stole your knife. It gave me a new skill and a bit of experience towards my next renown level. Not that I know what you use renown for, but I'm sure it'll come in handy at some point.
Peter blinked at her in confusion, still trying to recover from the kiss.
Well, okay. I have no idea what half the words you're saying mean. Heck, I'm still coming to terms with the fact that you're 2 renown levels above me. Didn't we arrive at the same time?
Beth winked at him.
Don't worry. I'm sure you'll catch up. We should see if you can get some new skills.
Peter ran a hand through his thinning hair.
Honestly, I'm a bit overwhelmed by all this game stuff right now. I just want to get to our new home and hopefully find our kids.
That sucked all the wind out of Beth's sails. She'd gotten caught up in this strange new world, and mention of the kids brought reality crashing down. They were stuck here. Really stuck here, with no avenue home and no way of knowing whether their kids were okay. Or her grandfather. Peter cringed when he saw how his words affected his wife.
I'm sorry, hon. I didn't mean to bring you down.
Beth shook her head and gave him a tight-lipped smile.
No, you're right.
She handed his knife back and resumed hiking.
There's a gaminess to this world, but it's not a game. We were lucky and arrived together. But the kids? Angela never liked camping, and Mark only did a few years with the Boy Scouts. And then there's Grandpa Jack. He's been such a good man. He doesn't deserve to die alone in the middle of the woods.
You may want to pump the brakes on that one, Peter said. I'm just as concerned as you about the kids, But your grandfather is a tough old root. He's the last person I'm worried about.
He's 95 years old, Peter.
He's fought Nazis, Beth.
She scowled, but let it slide.
I guess there's nothing to be gained by worrying. He'll do his best, just like the rest of us. All we can do is get ourselves to Palmyre in one piece.
Chapter 9. Magic. Yep. The pain was back. If hit point meters were a thing, she'd be in single digits right now. Any hope that auto-healing existed on Arenia was hella gone at this point. Plus, her mouth was full of mistletoe. Angela wheezed as she coughed and spat out the woody plant.
Okay, gotta get through this,
she thought, clenching her jaw and scowling as she tried to will herself not to pass out. The goddess wouldn't have left her in this situation if there wasn't a way out. She just needed to figure out what that was. Wait, didn't Anad say she was giving Angela a spell? Of course, that had to be it. Not that anyone had told her how to cast a spell. This world was shit for tutorials. But she should be able to work it out, right? Angela summoned her tome, and the stack of stone tablets thudded onto the branch in front of her. They slid sideways, landing in such a way that the top sheet was leaning against the others, facing Angela. It took a bit of squinting, considering how close it was to her face, but as soon as she read the one-word title, a flutter of excitement rose in her belly. Runes.
Druids use runic magic.
Angela skimmed the tablet to see what spells she had, only to discover that it was blank save for a single rune.
Breath of the Forest. Goddess rune.
The name sounded awesome. And yeah, frickin' goddess rune. So that was cool. But the rune itself was just a simple hexagon with a circle inside it. Nothing else. No description of how to use it, how to activate it, where to put it. Nada. Well, it was a rune, right? That meant she probably had to draw it and power it somehow. And since she wanted it to do something to her own body, the logical place to draw it was on herself. All she needed was a medium to draw with. For better or for worse, that was something she had in abundance at the moment. Since Angela had fallen on her left side, her right arm was in okay shape, and she was able to use the back of her sleeve to wipe the dirt off her forehead. She then dipped her index finger in the blood that was leaking out of her ear. Probably not a good sign, and carefully drew the rune onto her forehead. Yeah, she couldn't see what she was doing, but it was a hexagon with a circle in it. Not exactly Renaissance art. Because Angela was drawing the symbol blindly onto her forehead, her eyes happened to be focused on the runes tablet that lay centimeters in front of her face. As a result, she was able to watch as the tablet changed the moment she finished the rune, part of the stone seeming to crumble and blow away to reveal new words etched into the slab.
1 rune spells. Breath of the Forest. Rank, infinite. This spell draws on the vitality of the forest to fully heal yourself or another creature. Cost, unknown.
Fucking A,
Angela said. Now all she had to do was work out how to power the thing.
Breath of the Forest,
she said. No response.
Cast Breath of the Forest?
Again, no result.
Summon Breath of the Forest? Cast Breath of the Forest on me? Cast Breath of the Forest, please? Simon says, cast Breath of the Forest? Abracadabra?
Nothing.
Shit.
It was time to try something new. Angela thought about the wording of the spell description. It drew on the life energy of the forest around her, right? Maybe she had to do something to make it happen, not just trigger the spell as though it was a game.
Okay, you can do this,
she muttered to herself. Closing her eyes, Angela tried to smell and listen to the forest around her. She could hear birdsong and smell the loamy richness of the soil she was lying on. The river's trickling was also audible, as was the wind as it made its way through the boughs of the trees. Through it all, there was a sense of calm, but of calmness with energy to it, of vitality. Wait a second. Wasn't that exactly what the spell description said? Angela performed the same exercise and was again able to feel that sense of vitality in the forest. What's more, sensing that vitality created a coolness on her forehead where the rune was, like dipping your toe into cold water on a hot day. Taking a cue from that sensation, Angela attempted to tap into the vitality and pull it into the rune, to use that power to regenerate her broken body. Almost immediately, the coolness on Angela's forehead poured into her body, flooding her like a mountain stream. Wherever that cool energy touched, it began healing her, realigning her bones and sealing her flesh shut. The experience should have been excruciating, but it was instead transformed by the benevolent magic into a mild body high that Angela decided was suspiciously reminiscent of pot brownies. The process was over in moments. As soon as Angela's body was healed, she felt a mild sensation of heat on her forehead. Just a flash, signifying the spell's completion. Curious about the reason for the heat, Angela wiped her forehead with her palm, discovering that nothing remained of the rune except a smudge of ash. Apparently, runes self-destructed after use on Arenia, something she'd have to keep in mind. Angela got onto her knees and sat back on her heels, taking a deep, blissfully pain-free breath. She smiled, reveling in the feeling of her body being whole again. Then she got bitch-slapped by the rules of magic. Angela screamed as intense pain rocketed through her skull. She grabbed onto the sides of her head in a desperate attempt to keep her brains from shooting out her ear holes, dropping to the ground and rolling in the dirt as she moaned in agony. The pain built to a frightening crescendo, then, abruptly, it was gone. Angela lay in the dirt, moaning.
Nope. Nuh-uh. I'd rather get stabbed in the eye than go through that again. Fuck spellcasting, it is not cool enough.
Something had to have gone wrong. There was no way the pain she'd just endured was a normal part of using magic on Arenia. Grabbing her runes tablet, Angela looked to see if anything had changed. Sure enough, an entry had been added.
Druidic spellcasting.
Druidic spells are cast through the construction of runic patterns consisting of one or more base runes. If the spellcaster does not use a spell-appropriate component to absorb the backlash when the runes are destroyed, that cost will be borne by the druid's own body. Note, just as with weapons and crafting, the rules of spellcasting must be discovered through teaching and discovery. Have fun. Try not to get killed. Or try. Death is a great way to learn what doesn't work. And it's much more fun to watch. Below that, the spell description had also been modified.
Breath of the Forest. Rank, infinite. This spell draws on the vitality of the forest to fully heal you or another creature.
Cost? A single sprig of mistletoe. We'll give you this one as a freebie because it's funnier to tell you now.
You asshole planet,
Angela said. She'd had mistletoe in her mouth and spat it out. If she hadn't, it would simply have been consumed by the spell. Instead, she'd forced the magic and absorbed the backlash herself. And that was from a rank 1 spell. What the hell was the backlash from something with an actual kick to it? A full day's vomiting? A week? Something even worse? Whatever it was, she wanted no part of it.
Wait a sec.
Angela looked at the description again. Huh. While it was a 1-rune spell, its rank was listed as infinite, not 1.
Infinite rank? What the hell does that mean?
Meh. Not a mystery she'd be unraveling anytime soon. Angela struggled to her feet and took in her state. Her clothes were torn and dirty, but she was alive and on the path to becoming a druid. And she'd just done magic.
Holy shit, I just did magic!
Angela clapped her hands in glee and danced around. Then she set about stripping all the mistletoe she could find off the branch she'd broken from the tree. Chances were good that she'd be needing that spell again, and she sure as hell didn't want to suffer through backlash again if she could avoid it. Once she was done, Angela put her hands on her hips and looked around. She was ready to go, but was faced with a bit of a quandary. Namely, whether she needed a weapon. This was the forest, and she was some kind of druid trainee. So would animals attack her? If so, was it okay to defend herself? It was kind of a gray area, and Angela didn't want to appear to be going out hunting if that wasn't cool with a Nad. Fortunately, Druid lore had given Angela a cop-out solution. The shillelagh. Effectively just a walking stick that doubled as a club, the shillelagh was both practical and simply dripping with druidy goodness, and a hell of a lot better than a pocket full of rocks. Speaking of which, Angela looked at the base of the tree where she had left the rocks and the book she'd taken from Earth. Strangely, while the rocks were still there, the book was gone. Some animal must have dragged it off, which was more than fine with Angela. Better it dragged off the book than her. That meant it was shillelagh time. Traditionally, a shillelagh was a stick of blackthorn wood with a knob at the end that doubled as a handle when walking and a bonking tool when fighting. However, given that blackthorn grew in deciduous forests on Earth and Angela was in an evergreen forest on Arenia, it was probably okay to stretch the fiction somewhat. Angela's eyes fell on the branch she had just been stripping of its mistletoe and took note of the lumpy bolls that protruded where the parasitic plant had messed up the hemlock's growth. Yep, that would do. With a bit of effort, Angela was able to break off the ends, leaving her with a crappy stick just over a meter long that was splintered on both ends and would probably bend in half if she tried to hit anything with it. Hopefully that would be enough to scare away anything that tried to attack. Unless it was like forest trolls or something, in which case she was screwed no matter what weapon she was carrying.
Doot-de-doo, off we go,
Angela hummed as she hiked over to the river.
I'm a badass, don't mess with me, or I'll hit you with a piece of tree.
After about 20 minutes of Angela singing and walking along the riverbank, it occurred to her that maybe singing in an ostensibly monster-infested forest wasn't the best of ideas. So she opted to shut the hell up and try not to get noticed. That lasted all of 30 seconds.
Okay, super hungry. Need something to eat.
Angela peered into the trees. They had grown thicker as she progressed, and the riverbank was now full of mosses and low ferns. And mushrooms. She walked up to a patch and stared at them side-eyed.
Will you kill me if I eat you?
She said to the mushroom. It didn't say anything back. She evaluated it closely and came back with the determination that it was mushroom-like. Angela was torn. On the one hand, she liked mushrooms, and she was hungry. On the other hand, she liked being alive. Not poisoning yourself was a tried-and-true method of staying that way. Unfortunately, she had always bought her mushrooms from the farmer's market, so her identification skills were non-existent. That said, this particular mushroom looked a lot like the white mushrooms you could find at any grocery store, so chances were already high that it was okay to eat. Angela resolved to play it safe.
All right, Mr. Mushroom. I'm going to eat a teensy tiny piece of you. If nothing happens in 10 minutes, I'm going to assume you're not poisonous.
She plucked the mushroom from the ground and carried it to the river's edge, where she washed it in the crisp mountain water. Being as careful as possible, she took a minuscule bite and then sat down on a rock to evaluate the effects. When the vomiting finally stopped 30 minutes later, Angela glared at the mushroom with a sea of hate in her eyes. It laughed at her and shook its head.
Oh man, you are so fucked up,
the mushroom said.
You were so worried about getting poisoned that you never stopped to think about getting high. You're talking to a mushroom.
Because you're the asshole who did this!
She snapped. The mushroom held up his little mushroom hands.
Hey, I was just hanging out under a tree, lady. Ain't my fault.
Angela squeezed her eyes shut.
This is so messed up. Getting high on mushrooms shouldn't make them talk to me.
And yet it did. Next time, don't mow down on mushrooms of +3 anthropomorphization.
She opened her eyes.
Is that a thing?
The mushroom shrugged.
How the hell should I know? I'm your hallucination.
Leave me alone,
Angela said.
I just need to pull it together enough to cast a heal spell, and then it's bye-bye, mushroom guy.
The mushroom chuckled.
Good luck with that. You're still on cooldown.
Please. I don't know that, so how would my hallucination...
The mushroom wagged a mushroom finger at her.
Tisk tisk. Not admitting something to yourself isn't the same as not knowing it.
She glared at the mushroom, but realized the little shit might be onto something. Feeling the forest around her, Angela noted that while she could still feel the vitality, she couldn't touch it the way she had when she'd cast her spell. Calling up her stone tablets, Angela sifted through them and noticed that she now had one labeled Runes and another labeled Spells. Apparently, the information had been split up at some point. She grabbed the one labeled Spells and focused on it. As soon as she did, she saw more information appear.
Breath of the Forest. Rank, Infinite. This spell draws on the vitality of the forest to fully heal you or another creature.
Cost, a single sprig of mistletoe. 17 minutes, 8 seconds remaining. As she watched, the timer at the bottom of the entry changed, taking down a second at a time.
Seriously?
Angela said.
There's more than an hour cooldown on my only spell?
Yeah. Total balls,
the mushroom said, nodding its large white cap. Angela glared at it before picking up a different tablet, this one labeled Conditions.
Conditions. Hallucinations. Anthropomorphization, Stage 3. -2 will. Auditory, Stage 1. -1 will. Abrasiveness, Stage 1. +1 charisma. Hungry, Stage 1. -1 constitution.
Oh, goody,
Angela muttered. The lack of a conditions timer sucked, but so did most of her experience on Arenia.
All right. I'm getting out of here. I'm still hungry as shit, and Palmdale or Pullman or Palmyre or whatever the hell that town is called isn't getting any closer.
She used her shillelagh to pull herself up off the ground, groaning at both the upset in her tummy and the hunger that warred with it.
What about me?
The mushroom said.
I'm good company.
Angela looked at the partially eaten mushroom, who was now giving her big doe eyes.
I've got friends,
he said, gesturing to the other mushrooms growing under the tree.
Yay! Take us! Please! Take us! We're a good time! Hooray!
They shouted in chorus. Angela rolled her eyes and looked skyward.
You've got to be kidding me.
Chapter 10. The Fog. Mark awoke to a tugging on his leg. Not a yank, more like something pulling on his bandages. He knew on some level that he needed to stop it from happening, but he was deep in the postictal confusion following his seizure and couldn't work out where he was, let alone what was happening. Was he outside? Why did it smell like dirt and rotting wood? It was so hard to think. How long had he been out? It could have been minutes, or it could have been hours. Given the darkness outside, it was probably hours. Or not. He passed out again. This time, it was pain that woke him. Something was biting his leg. He kicked whatever it was, and the thing scampered away. Maybe a rat of some kind? Wouldn't that be ironic? Kill a dire rat, then get eaten by a normal-sized one. Mark had to get moving. No matter how hard it was to think, he had been lucky not to be killed while he was unconscious, especially since the growing light outside suggested he'd been there all night. However long that was. Like so many things, he had no idea how long a night was on Arenia. The uncertain nature of time on Arenia didn't change what Mark needed to do, so he began the laborious task of pushing himself backwards out of the hole in the log pile. It was an exhausting act, and by the time he was outside, he was just about spent. Were debuffs a thing on this world? Out of curiosity, he opened his tome. Sure enough, there was now a tab labeled Conditions.
Conditions. Postictal confusion. Stage 3. -5 will. -5 intelligence. Postictal exhaustion. Stage 3. -8 strength. -8 constitution. -5 dexterity. Postictal malaise, stage 3. No desire to eat, limited emotional range, -1 constitution. Mangled left calf, stage 2. -1 strength, -2 dexterity, -1 will.
Holy crap, Mark thought. If those are the debuffs now, what were they right after my seizure? Looking at the numbers, Mark guessed that the max grade debuff was so high that it had dropped his constitution to 0. That would certainly explain his passing out. With a bitter sigh, Mark surveyed the area where he'd fought the dire rat. The carcass was nowhere to be seen. Not even bones remained. Unfortunately, the same could be said for the majority of his gear. A fit of depression washed over Mark as he thought of what it would take to survive on the shoddy remnants of his gear. Couldn't he just lie down and go back to sleep? No! He knew he needed to keep moving, that his desire to give up was the post-seizure malaise talking, and he couldn't afford to listen. He had to push through the fog and his aching body, not to mention the searing pain in his leg. Forcing himself forward, Mark gathered what he could. His backpack had been torn open, and the rations were eaten, and his bedroll was shredded beyond recognition. A bit of hunting turned up his camp knife, but the torches were torn apart, and his flint and steel was now just flint. Hopefully, he could use his knife to get a fire going, but that would require luck, and Mark was pretty sure he'd exhausted his short supply. The last bit of salvage Mark found was his canteen, which, shockingly, had not been destroyed. It even had water in it. Mark popped it open and took a deep drink, savoring the sensation. Seizures were a killer on the body. A seizure. God damn it,
Mark whispered, dropping his face into his sleeve. Why did he have a seizure so soon? And a grand mal at that? His anticonvulsants should have taken a week to clear his system. Couldn't he have gotten at least a couple of days' grace before they started? Instead, he had gotten one in less than an hour. Was it something about the trip to Arenia? Had it taken longer than he thought? Or was it something to do with Arenia itself? Oh no. Realization slammed into him. The conversation before he arrived. The one with the voice when he signed the contract. That voice had said that Arenia had advanced magic, while Earth had advanced science. The implication was that Earth's science wouldn't work on Arenia. But what did that mean for the medicine already in his body? Had its effects simply vanished the moment he'd arrived? If that was the case, well, he was about to experience the worst withdrawal possible.
Nuh-uh,
he admonished himself.
Don't go down that rabbit hole.
Mark lifted himself off the ground, wobbling from the combination of the seizure and the need to put almost all of his weight on his right leg. He had to get moving while he was still able. But to where? Down the ravine? Back up it? The smart bet was probably up since he knew there were exits that way, but that meant climbing over the log pile, and in his current state, he didn't think he could pull it off. If he went down the ravine, he'd end up following the creek. That had to lead somewhere, right? It only took one wincing step for Mark to see that he wouldn't be going anywhere if he didn't do something about his leg. Since he didn't know any healing spells, assuming he could even learn spells, he instead looked around for a makeshift crutch. Mark found something after a bit of hunting, but it was closer to a branch than a stick. A couple of feet taller than him, the length of wood was splintered and broken on one end and covered in twigs and small branches. Those he was able to strip off with the camp knife, but there was nothing he could do about the mangled end. It probably needed to be sawed off, but since he was all out of saws at the moment, it would have to do as is. It was time to move. At first, it wasn't easy. Between the confusion and the mangled leg, Mark struggled to make any progress. The staff helped, but he could still barely put any weight down. Then, after about 10 minutes of movement, he abruptly felt the fog in his head lift somewhat. He even felt like some of his strength had come back. A glance at his tome showed the reason why. His exhaustion debuff had just dropped to stage 2. He couldn't help but wonder how long before it dropped to stage 1. Too bad there wasn't a timer. but maybe the system governing Arenia considered that too unrealistic. If that was even possible in this place. Still, the mental fog was clearing faster than it did on Earth, so he wasn't about to complain. After another half hour of walking, Mark was notified that he'd picked up a new skill.
New survival skill learned. Hiking. Skill level 11. Tier 1.
I suggested we only give you half the level since you're only using one leg, but they said that's against the rules. Looks like fun is against the rules, too.
Tier 1 bonus. Increased foot durability when hiking.
Since this skill predates your arrival in Arenia, it has been set at a level commensurate with the practical ability you already possess.
650 XP earned. Cumulative.
It was a higher intro tier than he would have expected, but Boy Scouts did a lot of hiking, so maybe not so surprising. And while there wasn't much of a bonus for Tier 1, no blisters was certainly better than blisters, especially when you only had one good foot.
Renown level up. Level 6 achieved. XP 5,200. XP to next renown 2,200.
Even though the messages were simple and being broadcast directly into Mark's awareness, it was still hard for him to process them through the fog of post-seizure confusion that still bound his brain. He could handle the idea of an increase in renown, though, despite having no idea what those levels were for. And while level 6 had come easily, the experience needed for the next level suggested the difficulty would ramp up significantly. Expecting those gains to continue at his current pace would be foolish. Mark stopped. His head hurt from trying to think about this world's leveling system, and even with the hike being predominantly downhill, a half-hour hike in his condition required a monumental effort. Plunking himself on a large, moss-covered rock, Mark took a moment to look at the sky and gauge the time. The sun was at its zenith, and there did appear to be only the one sun, so it was currently noontime. For what that was worth. Its path was also off to one side rather than being directly overhead, so Mark arbitrarily designated that as south, which meant that he was stuck walking west until he could get out of this ravine. Unfortunately, the ravine walls kept getting steeper the longer he walked. If they didn't taper off soon, he was going to be in real trouble. Mark leaned heavily on his makeshift staff and stared at the ground for a moment. He was just so tired. "Come on, man," he whispered. Heaving himself to his feet, Mark once again stumbled down the ravine. The journey didn't get any better, despite picking up another level in his hiking skill. He fell several times when he placed his bad leg incorrectly, or the butt of his staff slipped, but each time he managed to get up and continue. At least there was water in the creek to drink, but food was going to be a problem. In a way, the postictal malaise was somewhat of a blessing, masking as it did what should have been a gnawing hunger. Which wasn't to say he'd trade that benefit for removal of the other negative effects. At least they had all dropped to stage 2, but for all he knew, it might stay that way for another day. Good times. At some point, Mark started to get a tickling on the back of his neck. Remembering the sense danger skill he'd picked up earlier, he made a pretense of stopping to catch his breath. Yes, he'd constantly been on the lookout, and there wasn't anything visible, but there was still the occasional rustle that seemed at odds with the surroundings. Unfortunately, there was no way to know for sure if he was in danger.
Sense danger skill increased to level 2. Tier 0.
Of course there's a way to know for sure. It's called getting mauled to death.
50 XP earned.
Growls resonated from the ledges overlooking the ravine, sending chills through Mark. He peered up to see if he could identify the source of the sound, but a mist had gathered, causing the air to grow heavy and wet. As he peered up at the edge of the ravine, Mark was able to make out 5 sets of red eyes peering down at him. At first, he was worried it was more dire rats, but the glowing pupils were too wide apart for that. Too wide for wolves, even. Granted, what the hell did he know about the eye width of an Arenian wolf? Mark picked up his pace, hobbling faster down the ravine. For now, the creatures seemed content to stay up on the ledge, but for all he knew, they were trying to maintain his attention while their friends circled back behind him. If that happened, he was toast. He couldn't fight off a geriatric Pomeranian in his condition, let alone a pack of Arenian red-eyed not-wolf wolf things.
Go!
Mark shouted.
Screw off, mutts!
He waved his staff at them.
See this? Super powerful magic staff! I'll transmogrify your asses into shoe leather!
The taunts did not have the desired effect. Instead of merely lurking above him, the creature's growls turned into a staccato of yelps and clicking. Two of their number split off and headed into the woods, deadly silent in contrast to their loud packmates. It reminded Mark of a nature documentary he'd seen about how transient killer whales hunted seals, where one or two would sneak off and go quiet in order to set up an ambush. Which was cool when you were on your couch, not so much when you were the seal.
Come on, come on, come on!
Mark muttered to himself as he forced his weakened body to move faster. There was no logical argument for why he needed to move quickly, but it was fair to say that his fight reflex was triggering pretty hard at that moment, and he was in no mood to argue. As Mark moved, he noticed that the ravine walls had spread wider and lower as the creek he was following slowed down and spread out. That was bad news. If the ravine walls were lowering and the creek was spreading, that probably meant he was heading towards some sort of open area. In fact, the creatures tracking him had probably been following him for a while, knowing he would eventually emerge in an easier-to-access location. Given that some of them had split off, there was a strong chance he was heading into an ambush. What Mark needed was an advantage that would help him hide, and he found it in a thick fog bank that wasn't too far ahead. It looked pretty foreboding, more like a gray wall than proper fog, but it was that or giving up hope altogether. Buckling down, he leaned heavily on his staff and forced himself into a hobbling run across the rough forest terrain, barely choking back a cry of pain over the waves of agony coursing up his leg. The first 10 meters of Mark's run produced no signs of the creatures from the ravine ledge. He began to harbor some hope of making it to his destination, but when he hit the halfway mark, he was struck with a sense of foreboding so strong that it caused him to instinctively swing his staff around and duck off to the side. Something smashed into Mark's staff, the impact taking the thing off course and causing it to crash shoulder to shoulder into Mark. Much to Mark's surprise, he seemed to get the better of the collision, able to stay on his feet while the creature was sent tumbling along the ground. When Mark managed to get a good look at the creature, he realized why. Instead of a large, bulky beast like the dire rat, this new assailant was of a completely different build. Only around 40 pounds, it had a low body and long limbs that would have seemed gangly if Mark hadn't already witnessed them slipping silently through the forest terrain. Its head was squat and triangular, sitting atop a long neck and boasting big, wide-set red eyes over teeth that looked like they had been stolen from a lion. If pressed, Mark would have said it looked like a four-legged spider with a praying mantis head that had been shoved inside the skin of a hairless cat the size of a Doberman Pinscher.
Wow, you are ugly,
Mark said, his jaw dropping. He couldn't stop staring.
Seriously, by every objective measure, you are hideous. I mean, maybe among your species you're handsome, but where I come from, you look like a flaccid syphilitic penis with teeth.
Mark realized he was babbling, but for some reason the creature wasn't attacking, so he continued talking while simultaneously backing towards the wall of cloud.
So, where are your friends? You guys hang out a lot? Where'd you meet?
He snapped his fingers.
I know. You met at church, didn't you? The one where you worship whatever deity got hammered and did the drinking dice equivalent of creature creation? Because let me tell you, there is no way anyone, even a god, is creative enough to have invented something as hideous as you off the top of their head. It had to be an accident. Hell, that's probably how your species procreates. You wake up one morning with a massive hangover and look next to you on the bed and go, man, how drunk was I? Next thing you know, boom! More penis mantises running around the house.
Why does the food speak?
A voice said from behind Mark, causing him to halt abruptly. The sound was harsh and guttural, but the creature clearly understood what Mark was saying, which, considering the content of Mark's monologue, represented a serious oversight on Mark's part. Mark turned around slowly. There were two more of the creatures there, one of which had blue stripes on its body. As Mark investigated the newcomers, 2 more creatures came out of the mist to his left and another 3 to his right. Mark glanced forlornly at the fog wall. So close, yet so far. The blue-striped creature followed Mark's gaze and then looked back at him.
Food always runs, but not into the fog. Never into the fog.
Great. The fog is haunted. Of course it is. What kind of fantasy world has banks of fog that aren't haunted?
Mark glared at the creature.
Maybe I want to die in the fog? Maybe I think that the fog would be better than getting sliced up by you guys?
The creature jerked its head at an angle.
We would kill you quickly. You would nourish our young, and your gods could retrieve your soul. Not in the fog. Even gods do not escape the fog.
Mark looked at the creature, then back at the fog, then back at the creature, then at his surroundings, then back at the creature.
Getting eaten by these things can't seriously be my best option, right?
Disturbingly, it seemed like the creature legitimately expected Mark to just lay down and die, which suggested others had made that decision before. Hardly a good sign. Avoiding a confrontation was obviously in their best interest as well. Despite the certainty that Mark would lose, they had no idea how capable he was with his makeshift staff. For all they knew, he was a ninja with the thing and would kill a couple of them before he went down. Mark began to ask a question, but the words came out jumbled, and he felt a lightness inside his head, followed by a twitch in his hands.
No.
Given how Mark's day was going, the onset of another grand maul was hardly surprising. What was surprising was the way the fog pulsed, thumping outwards with each shake of his hands. As much as the movement of the fog confused Mark, it elicited utter pandemonium from the creatures. The blue-striped leader shrieked a question at Mark as his followers jumped around in agitation, but the words were twisted into incomprehensibility by Mark's seizure. Even still, it seemed like the creature was placing blame on Mark, which left him staring in bewilderment. How was this his fault? Another twitch came, longer in duration, and this time gray-white tendrils burst from the wall of fog, stretching a dozen meters out before collapsing back with each shiver of Mark's limbs. The creature's panicked narrative reached a fevered pitch that was no more intelligible than before. When Mark's pleas came out garbled as well, the creature sprang towards him with claws outstretched. The last thing Mark saw was the entire wall of fog surging around them, and the last sound he heard were harsh screams that needed no translation. Chapter 11. Ambush. A small fire burned in Jack's campsite, just enough for him to cook the small brook trout he'd caught. It wasn't much of a meal, but it would have to do for now. Without any familiarity with the local plants, meat was the best bet for safe food. Although he had seen some things that were pretty similar to Earth's plants. Even the fish looked close enough to a trout that he was willing to call it one. For now, though, he'd stick with meat and save his rations until he wasn't able to find some game. Eventually, he would need a more balanced nutritional profile, but a couple days as a carnivore wouldn't kill him. Besides, he'd probably get one of those damn pieces of flying paper if malnutrition was setting in. He could save the hardtack until then. With his meal done, Jack wiped off his hands on his pants and gathered up the sticks he'd set to drying out around the edges of the flames before kicking some dirt on the fire to put it out. Hopefully, the snares he'd set with some fishing line would net a bit of game that he could cook for breakfast. If not, well, that was life. Better to have dry tinder and no reason for a fire than to need a fire and have no tinder. Jack took the sticks and tossed them inside a large hole in the bole of the tree so that they'd stay dry if it rained, then cinched up his backpack and set about climbing up into the higher branches. It was a larger tree than the pines where he'd landed, close to his height and diameter, but by knotting one end of his rope into a saddle and tossing the other end over the lowest branch, around 10 meters up, he was able to lean back and shuffle-step his way into the canopy. During the climb, he had another one of those little paper pieces pop up and vanish right away, but he'd discovered a while back that by drawing a big X through the different sections of his tome, it would stop the papers from automatically intruding into his mind. Which was nice. One less pain in the ass to deal with. Once Jack reached a stable branch, he found a comfortable position and peered down at his campsite. Jack wasn't an idiot. He knew this was a dangerous world he'd landed in, and he was no stranger to spending nights in hostile territory. There were 2 keys to nighttime survival. The second was the easier of the 2. Find a place to sleep where you wouldn't be discovered. So far, he'd managed that by using small caves or hollowed-out trees where he could barricade himself for the night. The first key, though, and the far harder one, was knowing when you'd already been discovered. Once that happened, you needed to get intel, then eliminate the threat through evasion or direct engagement. Which is why he was up in a tree, waiting to see what had found him. After maybe an hour, there was a rustle in the bushes, and Jack tensed. Even in low-light conditions, his sight was excellent, so he could make out the figures that emerged from the bushes with relative ease. If that magic book with all his personal information hadn't convinced him this was a different world, then these things would have done the trick. They were humanoid, but came in 2 distinctly different sizes. The little guys were only around 4 feet tall and nimble as hell, but the taller ones were a minimum of 8 feet in height and built like a brick outhouse. They had animal skin clothing that was sturdily made, and the parts of them that weren't covered in clothing had a layer of coarse, light brown hair with a green tinge to it, like the algae-covered hair of a sloth. In fact, they kinda looked like a gorilla with the claws and coloring of a sloth, but with a slightly more pronounced maw. They didn't move like sloths, though. There was a smooth efficiency that suggested an intelligent, trained team. He watched with interest as the larger creatures set up a perimeter while the smaller ones darted around, uncovering every trace of Jack's movement. They even found the wood he'd dried and retrieved his snares, one of which had already caught a decent-sized squirrel. Their speech was clipped and staccato, with unmodulated notes punctuated by low bumps and breathy pops. Still, it didn't feel like they were using a primitive language so much as speaking in the abbreviated style he remembered from wartime patrols. After some time spent searching the campsite, 3 of the creatures, 2 of the larger and 1 of the smaller, gathered together in hushed conversation. While they were speaking, the hoot of an owl sounded off in the distant trees, followed shortly by another hoot in a different location. The hoots continued, and as they did, the creatures below paused to listen to the sound. It was only when a hoot came from directly above Jack that he realized what was happening. "Damn it!" he said, spinning around just in time to see one of the smaller creatures drop down on him from the upper branches. The creature hit him with enough velocity to knock Jack off the tree, but before he fell completely off the branch, he managed to get a grip on the creature's hide shirt. It wasn't enough for Jack to regain his balance, but he knew that ship had sailed already. Instead, he pulled the strange humanoid into a bear hug and, in the last moment before losing contact with the tree, pushed hard enough to take the creature with him and rotate it beneath his body. When Jack was in the war, he'd met some airborne troopers whose job it was to drop behind enemy lines and wreak havoc, allowing the ground troops to advance. They were some hard-ass soldiers, and one of them had once talked about the odd sensation of floating to the ground, helpless but knowing that the moment you hit the ground, you'd have to spring into action. Jack doubted he'd ever fully appreciate what that paratrooper was describing, but he sure as hell knew that when he hit the ground, he'd better be ready to wreak some havoc of his own. Jack and the creature hit the ground with a sickening thump, the creature landing flat on its back underneath Jack and cushioning his fall. Jack immediately rolled off sideways and sprung to his feet, surveying his surroundings. Spotting one of the larger types standing by the edge of the forest, Jack sprinted at the creature before it even had a chance to draw its sword. Taken off guard by Jack's charge, the thing was slow to react and took a step back, but before it could place its foot on the ground, Jack barreled into it, grabbing the creature's sleeve as he went past, while simultaneously using his leg to reap the creature's feet out from under it. Osotogari was as basic a judo throw as there was, generally the first technique a new practitioner learned, but it was also a devastating weapon at even the highest levels of the sport. The creature's legs went flying up in the air. Jack drove his weight down on top of the thing, hammering its back into the ground and knocking the wind out of it despite its significant size advantage. Jack used the momentum from his attack to roll across the creature and onto his knees, never releasing his grip on the creature's arm in the process. Lacking any time for subtlety, Jack simply pulled the creature's arm straight and drove his knee into the back of the thing's elbow as he stood up, shattering the limb with a sickening crunch. Jack had picked his assault deliberately, intending to break their perimeter and then sprint into the woods. It would take a massive dose of luck to shake the creatures in the woods, but those hopes were dashed when Jack looked up and discovered that one of the smaller varieties was already upon him, swinging its dagger in an overhead stab at Jack's head. Jack reacted without thought. Quickly stepping to the side, he jabbed one palm face up into the creature's armpit and the other face down on the hand with the dagger, using the fulcrum he'd created to take control of the weapon's momentum. Using that tiny bit of control, Jack was able to redirect the knife's motion past his face. Once it was clear, Jack pushed hard downwards, forcing the weapon's arc to continue in a sweeping curve that only terminated when the knife was driven into the creature's own meaty thigh. The creature screamed as the blade pierced its flesh, and it instinctively yanked the knife out of its leg. Jack wasn't inclined to let this thing stab him on a second attempt, so he tightened his grip on the creature's hand and used his superior weight to drive the blade back into the creature's leg, eliciting another howl of pain. He followed that up with a solid kick to the creature's chest, knocking it away and leaving it writhing in pain on the ground. Before Jack could attempt any further action, a sharp voice of command snapped through the air. Jack whipped his head around to see which of the creatures had spoken, only to discover that he was surrounded by a half-dozen armed and angry creatures.
Well, it was worth a try, he thought. All right, gents. You got me,
Jack said, on the off chance the creatures would understand him.
I hope I'm not in your territory or something, but if so, I'd be happy to leave. Didn't need to get these guys hurt.
He gestured to the downed creatures receiving medical attention from one of the smallest creatures in the bunch. A massive creature stepped through the ring of creatures to stand in front of Jack. This one dwarfed his fellows by a wide margin, at least 10 feet tall by Jack's guess, and intimidating as hell. Bad as they looked from far away, now that Jack was close to one and not fighting for his life, he could see that the creatures had a stubby, protruding maw containing a set of vicious, baboon-like teeth, as well as musculature that wouldn't have looked out of place on a gorilla. The damn thing looked like it could tear off Jack's arm and beat him to death with it. The fact that they carried weapons as well would have seemed ridiculous if it wasn't so terrifying. The creature in front of Jack, presumably the leader, stretched its maw wide and unleashed a roar that reverberated through the dark forest. He then grabbed the sword out of the hands of one of the other creatures and tossed it at Jack's feet, gesturing with his own weapon for Jack to pick it up. Jack looked down at the sword, his bushy eyebrows pulling together.
What in the hell am I supposed to do with that thing?
The creature roared at him again, this time pushing the blade towards Jack with the point of its own sword.
Again? Not interested,
Jack said, as he nudged the sword back towards the massive creature with his foot. The moment Jack's boot made contact, the creature to the leader's right exploded into motion. Before Jack could react, the creature swung its large mace in a savage, lateral blow that caught Jack squarely in the temple and launched him sideways across the clearing.
Condition: broken skull, resisted. Well-aged. Condition: paralyzed, resisted. Well-aged. Condition: brain degeneration, resisted. Well-aged. Condition: scalp wound, resisted. Well-aged.
The blow came as such a surprise that Jack didn't have the wherewithal to suppress the message that flashed past his consciousness. Not that it helped. If anything, the text left him more confused. By all rights, he should be dead. Jack cracked open one eye. Across the clearing, the leader was squaring off across from the one who had hit Jack, and both of them were making a hell of a lot of noise. The leader looked furious, while the other one somehow managed to appear smug even while roaring. The other creatures had devolved into two groups that seemed to be supporting one or the other of the belligerents, but as Jack watched, he could see some of the creatures leaving the bigger creatures' group and moving to the other camp. The tribal spectacle clearly had some great significance within the group, but that was irrelevant for Jack. He was pissed about what had happened, and rather than take the opportunity to run away, he let his temper get the better of him. Climbing back to his feet, Jack stormed over to the group of roaring creatures.
Hey!
he shouted, glaring at the creature who had hit him.
Where I come from, that's called a cheap shot. And the first rule of a cheap shot is that if you're gonna put someone down, they damn well better stay down.
As soon as Jack spoke, all the other creatures' heads swung towards him, their mouths agape. Surprisingly, the one that had hit Jack seemed to panic, but before it could do anything, the leader emitted a roar of triumph, drew its sword, and lopped off the challenger's head in one perfect stroke. Jack's eyes went wide at the sight of the head flying through the air, utterly shocked at the effect of his words. Blood flew from the open wound, and Jack's heart rate accelerated into a frantic staccato as his memories took him back to another forest on a different world.
How bad is it, Jack?
Barty's words were barely audible over the sound of mortars shredding the trees and sending fountains of dirt and shrapnel through the air.
Medic!
Jack screamed as he held his friend tightly on top of him, trying to keep as much of Barty in the foxhole as possible. He had his hand pressed to his friend's neck, trying to staunch the relentless flow of blood, but it kept seeping through his fingers no matter how hard he pressed.
Don't worry, Barty. It's gonna be fine. You're gonna be okay. $1 million wound?
Barty croaked, forcing a smile onto his shattered face. Before Jack could answer, another mortar landed nearby, ripping through the tree above them and showering them in wood chips. Jack blinked away the sawdust and looked down at his friend, taking a moment to evaluate his condition. Jack slumped back in the dirt, his hand falling away from Barty's neck. He lay there, artillery obliterating the woods, before eventually patting his friend on the shoulder. A man he'd never have known if it weren't for the war, but who'd been at his side since the first day of basic. "War's over, buddy," Jack whispered. "War's over." Jack staggered involuntarily and clenched his eyes open and shut. He hadn't thought about that day in years. Why now? And why with such painful clarity? A rough fist nudged Jack, and he opened his eyes to see the victorious creature staring at him. The thing grunted and gestured for him to follow. Jack merely glared. The creature grinned and grunted again, pointing in the direction he wanted Jack to walk. But Jack waved him off.
Can it with the grunts and pretending you're a bunch of idiots, all right? He said. Your crew functions with military precision. You don't do that without proper language.
The creature's eyes widened, and he stared at Jack with an odd expression. There was a round of curious glances between the gathered creatures before the leader finally responded.
This is unexpected, and a human annoyed at shadow beasts for acting like savages. That is new as well. Shadow beasts? Jack said. That is what you humans call us, is it not?
Jack shrugged.
No idea. What do you call yourself?
The creature's head tilted sideways, and what passed for eyebrows on its flat face scrunched together.
This may be the first time a human has ever asked. Among our kind, we are called the Chiandir. Right. Then that's what I'll call you. Seems stupid to call you anything else,
Jack said. The Chiandir leader bared his teeth at Jack. For a moment, Jack thought he'd offended the thing, but after taking in the rest of the body language, he realized it was the Chiandir equivalent of a grin.
What about you? You got a name? I am Canis,
the large Chiandir said.
You will come with us. Your fate can no longer be decided by my war party. It is now for the elders to decide. I'm guessing I don't have a choice? You do not.
Jack nodded, then gestured up the tree.
Can I at least get my stuff?
Canis followed Jack's gaze, but shook his head.
No, but one of the scouts will retrieve your pack. We will take it with us, and the elders can decide if it will be returned to you. Fair enough,
Jack said. It wasn't like he needed it if they were just going to kill him when they got wherever they were going. The band of Chiandir assembled themselves into marching formation while several of the smaller creatures disappeared into the woods to scout the way. As they left the clearing, Jack saw that they were leaving the Challenger's body in the dirt, not even bothering to strip it of supplies. Jack gestured to the corpse.
What was all that shouting about?
Canis didn't even look at the body as they passed it.
You humans believe us savages, that we are a vile species who fight within our ranks, murdering and eating anyone who enters our territory. The elves feel the same as the humans, as do the dwarves and the dragonkin and the beast folk, all city dwellers. The good species, as they view themselves, feel this way. To be fair, many of the other tribal creatures share the sentiment.
So basically everyone,
Jack said.
Yes,
Canis said.
But they are the ones who decide what makes a savage. We merely live as we have lived for thousands of years. Infighting is rare and is bound by rules, limited to matters of hierarchy. Even still, we rarely kill our kind, despite what you saw. However, that was a challenge for dominance of the war party, and to fail is to die.
Why'd he do it then?
Opportunities are rare. Herrick's was well-positioned and would have succeeded if you didn't have a skull of iron.
Can't say I understand what hitting me in the head with a club has to do with that fellow taking your job.
The Chiandir stopped, and the whole party stopped with him. The creature looked at Jack, a severe expression on his face.
You are trouble. We don't know what you are.
Jack cocked his head.
What do you mean?
Canis resumed his walk, and the war party continued with him.
When we learned of a human passing through our territory, we set out to find you. It is death for all who enter. It has always been this way. You understand?
Not really, but it's not my place to say. I'm kind of a newcomer around here.
Canis nodded.
That would explain your presence. Most know not to come here. When they do, though, we are not reckless. Some humans have strong skills with weapons. Others are talented magic users. They come here to gain experience and increase their renown, but they believe us savages and do not expect us to attack with patience and strategy.
So why didn't you kill me then?
Jack said.
With your numbers, you could easily have ambushed me 12 times over.
Because you made yourself extremely inconvenient,
Canis said. He bared his lips back.
Do you see these teeth? Do you see these claws? We are hunters. We are eaters of meat, and all beneath us are but fodder. The forest predators are our brothers, and we do not hunt them, just as they do not hunt us. It is the only law we have when we take our prey. But the humans, the elves, the dwarves, they gnash away at plants and seeds, sitting in their cities. They are no more predator than the bear who dines on berries, filling his belly for the winter so that we can fill ours.
Hang on a sec,
Jack said.
You're saying you eat the people you catch?
Of course. One is either a predator or prey. There are no others.
Jack grimaced.
So you didn't kill me because...
Because we do not hunt the carnivore,
Canis said, shaking his head.
We waited, expecting you to show yourself as prey. If you had, we could kill you with no concerns. But you didn't. You never ate the rations in your bag, instead taking fish and setting traps. You refused to eat anything but meat, passing up many plants we know are edible to your kind. What's more, one of our scouts found the place where you fought another meat-eater, but you followed our custom and refused to kill it. Time and time again, you refused the path of the prey and embraced the way of the hunter. I was forced to decide on a path forward. I chose to capture you and bring you to the elders. I knew others in the party disagreed, Herrick's chiefly among them. But it was my decision to make, not his. We waited until you put out your fire, expecting you to be vulnerable, but you had taken to the trees, hunting us as we were hunting you. We would have preferred to capture you, but then you attacked our scout and disabled 2 more of my fighters. Your refusal to kill other predators only made me more certain of my decision, but your attack took the decision out of my hands. By declaring yourself an enemy of the clan, it was my duty as war leader to kill you."
"And let me guess," Jack said. "You had to do it in fair combat, but I was unarmed?"
Canis nodded.
"Yes. Your refusal to pick up the weapon made the situation complicated, but when you touched it with your foot, Herrick chose to interpret it as you being armed. That is why he struck you. The only way a war leader can be deposed is if he fails in his duties and another member of the party is forced to take on the responsibility. It was the war leader's duty to kill you, and in killing you before I was able, Herrick was trying to claim that I was refusing my duty, and he was forced to step in."
"Seems pretty weak," Jack noted.
The Chiandir nodded.
"Normally it would be, but many of the party felt my choice to capture you was wrong, that I should have killed you immediately. When that choice led to the injury of 3 of my war party, some chose to ignore Herrick's paltry adherence to custom. Perhaps the elders will remind them."
Canis glared at several members of the war party, all of whom scrunched into a low posture and looked away, the hair on the back of their necks rising.
"Had you died, I most certainly would have been deposed. But you didn't."
He grinned.
"A war leader must deal with an enemy brutally and quickly. Herrick did neither. When you stood up, he went from claiming to be a war leader to interfering with one. Death was the only option."
"That's a hell of a price,"
Jack said. He hardly agreed with the harsh nature of Chiandir culture, but he was the interloper here. It wasn't his place to comment.
"Indeed,"
Canis said.
"That is why when one challenges, one must succeed. I was not ready to join the elders. Thanks to you, I don't have to."
"Seems harsh to kill you,"
Jack said, his bushy eyebrows pulling together.
"From a tactical standpoint, it makes no sense to eliminate the people with the most experience just because some upstart takes their job."
This time, Jack's comment was met with uproarious laughter from the entire party. It was a disturbing sound, not like human laughter, more like a hyena, but you could still make out the mirth in their eyes.
"I would not have been killed,"
the large Chiandir said, his voice still mirthful.
"I would have become an elder. I would have gone through the rebirth, then learned the stories, apprenticing until I could take my place among them. Just as when a scout becomes a warrior."
He gestured to one of the smaller varieties of Chiandir, who gave Jack a toothy grin.
"Promotion by deposition?"
Jack said, raising an eyebrow.
"It is our way."
Canis gestured ahead.
"We will arrive in a couple of days. Until then, you will make camp with us and remain under guard."
"What happens then?"
Jack asked.
"To me, I mean."
The Chiandir leader shrugged.
"You attacked the war party. I will bring you before the elders for judgment. They will find you guilty, and you will be executed. The only reason I have not done so myself is because your strange behavior and surprising resiliency will be of interest to them."
"Huh,"
Jack said.
"So my foregone execution hinges on me attacking the war party first?"
"It does,"
Canis said. Jack gestured with a thumb at one of the makeshift stretchers being carried by the war party.
"In that case, you may want to check your sources."
"What do you mean?"
"You think I'm nuts? I never attacked you. That guy pushed me out of the tree, so I grabbed him and used him as a crash mat."
Canis peered intently at Jack. Then his glare switched to the stretcher. Striding over to the wounded Chiandir, Canis's teeth bared in a snarl.
"Is this true? Did you break your war leader's orders?"
No! The human lies!
Stammered the scout.
"And you are willing to go before the elders to drink the sap with those words upon your tongue?"
The small Chiandir's mouth opened and closed, but he made no sound as he searched for a way to extricate himself from the situation.
You are damned by your silence,
Canis sneered.
Speak no more words until you appear before the elders. Pray that you find a more forgiving audience than I.
The broken Chiandier merely nodded. Canis returned to Jack's side and looked at him grimly.
It seems a grave injustice has been done. You have come to our lands and followed our customs, yet were met with aggression. I cannot say whether you will live, but there is much to think on.
Canis stared at Jack. For the first time, Jack saw a flash of hesitation in the huge war leader, but it was gone in an instant. The next words Canis spoke seemed to have a weight to them, even though they were delivered in the same tone and volume as the rest of their conversation.
What is your name?
He said. The question seemed to catch the rest of the Chiandier off guard, given their reaction of shocked silence.
John Milsom. But everyone calls me Jack,
he said. Jack kept an eye on the other Chiandier to gauge their response, but he needn't have bothered, as his words were met with a harsh chattering that erupted amongst the war party.
Mind telling me why my name is such a big deal with your crew?
Jack said. Canis patted Jack on the shoulder.
Because we do not name our food, Jack. And now, you have a name.
Chapter 12. Eliza. After 3 days in the bush, Peter was exhausted. It would be great if he could blame his wretched state on whatever had happened during his trip to Arenia, but the truth was that the potion had left him feeling better than he had in years. No, his current condition was the product of being in good old-fashioned, terrible physical shape.
You need to rest?
Beth said.
You don't look so good.
Peter waved her off.
No, I don't think so.
He lied. He didn't want to admit just how much better Beth was handling this experience, especially the rolling hills they'd been climbing for the last couple of kilometers.
Just, not used to all this walking.
Well, you let me know. I'm fine with stopping if you are,
Beth said. Her eyebrows steepled, and her head tilted in a way that Peter easily translated into, "Sure, honey. When you stop being so macho, let me know and we can stop." Actually, now that Peter thought about it, Beth didn't have her normal playfulness.
What about you? How are you doing with all this hiking?
Peter asked. Beth grimaced.
Now that you mention it, my feet are a bit sore.
Oh, let me see,
Peter said. He got some mild protestation from Beth, but she let him remove her boot and sock, revealing a multitude of blisters.
Holy hell, hon. Why didn't you say anything?
Beth cringed.
You seemed okay, and I didn't want to slow us down. It's not like either of us are hikers, so I assumed your feet were just as bad as mine.
No, they're...
Something Peter had read in his tome tickled at his memory. It hadn't seemed like a big deal at the time, but now he was reconsidering that position. Summoning his tome, Peter opened it to the skills section.
Hiking. The practice of getting from point A to point B by using your feet. If you can walk and don't have this skill, you need to seriously reconsider your life choices. Current skill level, 19. Tier 1, Hobbyist. Tier 0 bonus, none. It's walking. Tier 1 bonus, increased foot durability when hiking. Max. Tier 2 bonus, reduced chance of injury from poor footing. 9 out of 10. Tier 3 bonus, unknown. Tier 4 bonus, unknown. Tier 5. Grandmaster spot occupied. We think. She walked off into the woods one day and nobody has seen her since.
What level is your hiking skill?
Peter asked. Beth consulted her tome.
It's up a bit. Level 9. Why?
That explains it. The Tier 1 bonus is increased foot durability. I've been Tier 1 since we arrived, so my feet haven't been too bad.
I feel like such an idiot,
Beth groaned.
At least I'm not far from that bonus.
She bent down and gently squeezed her feet. wincing at the slight pressure.
What I wouldn't give for some moleskin right now.
Peter grinned.
Careful what you wish for. For all we know, people around here might literally skin moles for that purpose.
Ew.
Beth said, cringing.
Enough of that conversation. Help me over to that log so we can take a rest.
Peter picked up Beth's boot and helped her hop over to a log that lay near a gap in the trees where it overlooked the valley. They had been following a game trail through the woods, but a half hour ago it veered up the edge of a steep slope, resulting in some tough hiking. On the bright side, the path had rewarded them with several gorgeous views of the emerald forest sprawling before them. Beth took Peter's hand in hers and gave it a squeeze.
It's funny. Most of the time this place seems so strange. Then you get a view like this, and it could almost be home.
As if on cue, a winged lizard, maybe 2 meters long from nose to tail, flew out of the trees and blew lightning at a bird high overhead. The bird spasmed and dropped from the sky, only to be snatched out of midair by the lizard before it descended back into the trees with its meal.
And just like that, we're back to being strange,
Beth said, gripping Peter's hand tightly.
Good Lord,
he said, staring at the place where the lizard had disappeared.
Why don't we talk about something else?
His eyes darted around until they locked on a distant fog bank they'd seen a few times on their journey.
What do you think about that fog? I've noticed it a few times. It doesn't seem to move a whole lot. Do you think it's coming in off the ocean?
Beth followed his gaze and nodded.
It seems likely, doesn't it? I can't think of any other reason why it would sit still like that. Should we head towards it? We probably have a better chance of finding a settlement on the coast than in the middle of a forest.
Makes sense. And I certainly don't have a better idea, Peter said. Let's rest a bit longer and then head that way.
A snort of laughter burst from behind them, causing Peter and Beth to spin around and discover a woman in mottled brown leathers sitting on a rock only a few meters behind them. She sat in a relaxed posture, feet stretched out and crossed in front of her. She had the sun-weathered and fit appearance of someone who spent a lot of time working outdoors, and it made her age a bit tough to place. Given her long gray ponytail, though, Peter placed her age somewhere in her late 50s, if not older. Harmless, if one ignored the quiver on her left hip and short sword on her right, with an unstrung bow upright in her left hand that was probably a bit taller than she was when standing. The wiry strength of the weapon seemed a perfect match for the narrow-faced woman to whom it was attached, while the scar that ran from her left ear down halfway across her throat added to the general sensation that this woman's weapons weren't for show. The woman shook her head and chuckled.
Heading towards the fog would be your worst decision yet, and you've been making some terrible ones, so that's saying something.
Peter glanced around to see if more people were about to emerge from the woods, but from the looks of things, the woman was alone.
Who the hell are you? And what's wrong with heading to the ocean?
The woman winked.
Nothing at all. Except that,
she pointed at the fog,
is not the ocean.
Of course not. It's fog, and I don't see why we wouldn't head that way.
Peter sniped. He knew that he was being difficult, but he was annoyed that they had been so easily snuck up upon. The woman shrugged.
Fine. Have it your way.
She stood up and walked towards the forest.
Wait!
Beth called.
We really could use your help.
Beth glared at Peter and lowered her voice.
Do you think this trip is going well? We're almost out of food, and neither of us has a clue what we're doing. Even if we caught an animal, we couldn't cook it until one of us works out how to use that flint and steel. As it is, we're spending every night flirting with hypothermia.
Peter grimaced, but he couldn't ignore the truth of his wife's words. Neither of them was an outdoors person. Beth had been a social worker and later a teacher, and while Peter ran an orchard, that was a far cry from being a camping enthusiast. They couldn't afford to turn down help.
I apologize, he said to the woman. It's been a lot of hiking and bad nights, and it's left me pretty cranky. We'd appreciate it if you didn't leave.
The woman grinned and returned to her rock.
I wasn't gonna leave you. I just figured I'd wait here until you came back.
She plunked down and gestured at the log they were sitting on.
This is the third time you've enjoyed that view.
What?
Peter said.
You've been walking in circles, kid.
Peter looked out over the view again. Come to think of it, it did seem familiar. But he could have sworn.
Trust me,
she said.
I spotted you 2 days ago, scaring off all the game, and I figured I'd see what you were up to. It was pretty clear you had no idea what you were doing, and now that I'm speaking to you, I can see why. How the hell did 2 singulets end up way out here in the woods?
Beth and Peter looked at each other.
Actually, we're married,
Beth said. The woman looked confused for a moment, and then burst out laughing.
Wow, that was well done. Not many people can tell a joke with such a straight face. That's the key to selling it for sure.
Peter gritted his teeth. He understood that his weight and Beth's appearance made them appear an unlikely couple, a gap that had only grown since he'd stopped doing physical labor on the farm. But to be openly mocked by a woman who didn't even know them? Fortunately, Beth beat him to a response.
It's hardly a joke, she snapped. We're not single. We're married. And quite happily so.
The woman stopped laughing.
Wait, you think I'm talking about... Oh, that's rich.
She shook her head.
You're singlets. Single digits.
They stared at her blankly, and she rolled her eyes.
You're renown. You're both below level 10.
Oh, Peter said, finally understanding. You can tell what our renown is? The woman's expression shifted to confusion.
How could you not know how to check a person's renown? Just make eye contact and think about it. Everyone knows that.
She shook her head and muttered under her breath.
What the hell is wrong with these people?
Peter ignored her, focusing instead on making eye contact as she had described. Instantly, information jumped into his head.
Name, unknown. Species, unconfirmed. Human, suspected. Renown, level 39. Class, profession, unknown. Base stat average, 24.1.
Is level 39 high?
Peter asked. The woman gaped at him. Then her mouth snapped shut, and her eyebrows rose.
No, they couldn't be,
she muttered. She stood and walked over, looking them up and down. She grabbed Peter's hands and looked at them, then did the same with Beth.
You've at least got the scars of a farmer, or a former one,
she said to Peter. Then she looked at Beth.
But your hands are younger than you look. I moisturize,
Beth said. The woman snorted.
Don't say that to a laundress, or you're liable to get slapped.
Her eyebrows pulled together, and she looked back and forth at them, then up and down.
I'm going to ask something that will probably sound stupid, so don't laugh. Are you legends?
In my own mind,
Peter said, chuckling.
No, I mean, do you come from another world?
The question stopped Peter's chuckling real quick, and he glanced uncomfortably at Beth. It was brief, but it was enough to cause the woman to yip and slap her hands together.
I knew it,
she said.
From the day I first saw you struggle with a campfire, I knew something was off. Most children have that skill unlocked before they're 6 years old. Meanwhile, you're out here in the middle of nowhere, banging a flint and steel together without a stitch of char cloth in sight.
Char cloth?
Peter said.
I didn't realize there was an actual term for us,
Beth said.
Are there a lot of people from Earth here?
The woman's eyebrows darted up.
Gods, no. You're certainly the first I've ever met, and I'm no spring chicken. I've heard the stories, of course, but who hasn't? That's why you're called legends, after all. Does anyone else know about you? No, we haven't seen anyone else since we arrived,
Beth said.
Good. That's not information you want to share.
Why not?
Peter said. She snorted.
You've got a pretty optimistic view of the world if you don't think there are folks who take advantage of a person who can't die.
It was a simple observation, but Peter didn't have trouble imagining ways in which that kind of knowledge could be leveraged against them.
Understood. We'll keep it to ourselves, at least until we become stronger and can hold our own.
The woman shook her head.
Look, you seem like nice people, so I'm going to help you get to civilization if that's where you want to go. I'll even teach you a few things. But the first lesson is that there's always someone out there who's more powerful than you.
Peter shrugged.
Someone has to be the toughest, right?
Yes, but until you can beat a primal dragon in a fair fight, that person isn't you. Understood?
Peter didn't know what a primal dragon was, but it certainly sounded bad.
Okay, I get your point.
I'd hoped you would. Now, introductions. My name is Eliza Gray. Where are you two headed?
Peter and Beth,
Peter said, gesturing to the pair of them.
We need to get to Paulmeyer. We were given a house there when we were sent over.
Good. I was actually headed there when I found you.
She paused and did a double-take.
Did you just say you were given a house? Not many folks in Paulmeyer own a whole house.
It's not just us, Peter said. Something went wrong and we got separated from our kids and Beth's grandfather when we came over. The intention is that everyone will meet up in Paulmeyer, and the house is our compensation for that mistake.
Ah. Okay. Lots of questions about what you just said, but let's make sure I heard you right. You have a whole family of legends.
When they nodded, Eliza shook her head.
That is a quiver full of strange. I've never heard of such a thing. Even in our oldest myths, strange as it may be, we have to get to Paulmeyer as soon as possible. We don't even know if our family's alive, and I'm worried sick. Don't you have a familial bond? That should at least tell you if everyone is alive.
She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, but Peter still scowled. He was pretty sure that annoying lizard had mentioned something of the sort, but it hadn't occurred to him that he could use it to check up on the others. As with most things, it seemed his tome was the place to look, so he took it out and thought about the bond. Once again, it caused a new tab to appear that hadn't been there before.
Why can't it just be there to begin with?
Peter grouched to himself. He opened up the tab and scanned through it.
Familial Party. Jack Milsom. Permission not yet granted. Species, human. Renown, unknown. Base stat average, unknown. Status, normal. Beth Sullivan. Permission not yet granted. Species, human. Renown, level 5. Unclassed. Base stat average, unknown. Status, normal. Peter Sullivan. Species, human. Renown, level 4. Unclassed. Base stat average, 17.4. Status, normal. Angela Sullivan. Permission not yet granted. Species, human. Renown, unknown. Base stat average, unknown. Status, normal. Mark Sullivan. Permission not yet granted. Species, human. Renown, unknown. Base stat average, unknown. Status, at risk. Whereabouts, unknown. Turcoletta Milsom Sullivan. Permission not yet granted. Species, error. Renown, unknown. Base stat average, unknown. Status, error.
At risk? What does at risk mean?
Beth gasped. She had opened her own tome and was staring at it in concern.
And who's Turcoletta Milsom Sullivan?
Peter added.
Peter!
Beth said.
Mark is listed as at risk.
Of course he is, Peter said. He's stuck on this godforsaken planet with no medication, no survival instinct, and to be honest, no mental fortitude. If he weren't at risk, I'd assume this thing was broken.
Peter waved his tome at her to emphasize his point.
No. Your wife is right to be concerned,
Eliza said.
Your tome wouldn't say at risk if death wasn't an imminent possibility.
Imminent?
Peter said in surprise. That was not what he had expected. Just what was Mark experiencing right now?
Is there anything we can do?
Eliza got a pensive look.
That depends. Does it say where he is? It just says whereabouts unknown,
Beth said. The blood drained out of Eliza's face.
You must be mistaken.
Beth shook her head.
No, that's what it says.
Mine too, Peter added. Eliza wavered as though her legs had gone weak and sat back down on the stump. She made a gesture with her left hand, forming what looked like the OK sign, placing it on her forehead, heart, and lips, then muttered something Peter couldn't hear.
What is it?
Peter said when Eliza didn't speak. Eliza hesitated, then said,
A primal force.
Beth and Peter waited for more, but that was it.
What's a primal force?
Eliza's lips pursed.
They are things that predate the birth of this world. Of all worlds, gods and demons, dragons and kraken, the fundamental forces of nature itself.
She shuddered.
Only something older than the tomes could block their words, and if a primal is the reason your son is at risk, there is truly nothing you can do about it. Your best hope is that he dies quickly and is reborn somewhere far away from whatever has him.
Beth shook her head.
But
Eliza surged to her feet.
Nothing can be done,
she snapped, immediately looking chagrined. She pinched the bridge of her nose.
I'm sorry. It's just that the primals are not only immensely powerful, but they don't think as we do. For all we know, simply talking about Mark's situation could be turning its attention towards us. I do not want the attention of a primal. Nor do you. If you want to help your son get to town, when he's reborn, he's going to need your help getting through the aftermath of whatever trauma he's experiencing.
Peter put his arm around Beth's shoulder. She turned to him and whispered,
We might not have rebirths.
I know,
he whispered back.
But Eliza is right. All we can do is keep moving. Maybe he has another life remaining. And if not, there's still Angela and Jack to think about.
What does that mean?
Beth said sharply, fire rising in her eyes.
For God's sake, Beth, it means we have to continue forward, no matter what happens. You know I'm not saying Mark is expendable.
Beth took a couple of deep breaths and nodded.
Sorry. I know that's not what you're saying.
She turned to Eliza.
Please, let's go.
Eliza nodded somberly. She helped Beth back into her boots, even doing something to help with the blisters, then led them into the forest. Beth and Peter followed, lost in their own thoughts, but if they'd looked closely, they would have seen Eliza glance toward the fog with fear in her eyes. Chapter 13. Sibling Struggles. Mark staggered through the fog, constantly listening for the sounds of his pursuers. He panted to a stop, desperate to catch his breath, but he didn't know how long he had. The shrieks were farther away, but all it would take was... A wail split the air around Mark. He lurched back into a hobbled run, his staff now bearing more weight than his mangled leg. One of the creatures materialized out of the gray, just off to the side, and Mark reeled back to avoid running into it. The thing's spectral form was first enormous. Then it was small. Then it had flesh. Then it looked like a long-dead skeleton. Old, young, rich, poor, sick, healthy. The specter whipped through a cacophony of forms as it lunged to grab Mark. He reeled back to avoid the spectral hand, but the twisting motion forced him to put weight on his injured leg, and the jolt of pain caused him to stumble. He tried to turn the other way, but it was not enough, and the creature's twisted fingers managed to brush Mark's shoulder and send a convulsive chill shuddering through his body. For a moment, There was a wrenching sensation within Mark that mirrored a stabilization of the spectral form across from him, followed by the creature throwing its head back and reveling in the experience. Mark knew from experience that the creature's reaction was temporary, so he forced himself to push past the awful feeling and resumed his hobbled run, knowing that soon the creature's pursuit would begin anew. It was all Mark could do to grit his teeth and blink away tears. Ever since the fog had pulled him inside, his life had been a living hell. Pursued relentlessly by the twisted ghosts, they seemed drawn to him no matter where he went, hunting him with that touch that could break his body and overwhelm his mind. So, on he ran, leaning heavily on his makeshift staff with every step. Hunger racking his body and thirst tearing at his throat. He had no idea thirst could be painful, but compared to the alternative of slowing down and having his soul wrenched away, he had no choice but to continue, to ignore the char-covered ground and uncountable obstacles that mocked his every step. Over time, he had learned to instinctively dodge the ancient armor and bones that were strewn throughout this gray hellscape, a tableau of the dead still locked in frozen combat. There were no weapons he knew how to use, or even thought would be of use against the specters, so he didn't waste time on those remnants of battle. Instead, he focused on speed and the hope that he would somehow be able to break free of the fog and into something resembling salvation. As Mark ran, he began to detect a gradient of dispersal in the fog that surrounded him. It was small, but his hopes climbed at the prospect that he may be nearing the edge. Step by step, the gradient grew more apparent. The mists stuck to Mark's torn clothing, and tears leaked down his face, but his conviction that the fog would soon disperse grew, until he finally burst not into salvation, but a graveyard of the damned. Mark stood there, frozen. A great dome of fog rose over a perfect circle of clarity, surrounded by a single monolithic wall of gray that traced that circle in its entirety. And everywhere, covering every stitch of the ground, were skeletons. They were twisted, grotesque, their armor melted, or their bodies contorted into broken shapes. Some bore extra limbs or distorted proportions. Others were even worse, the posing of their bodies suggesting not a battle, but madness. A war had been fought here long ago. He knew that. But this? Nobody could claim victory on a battlefield where this was the result. Another shriek cut through the air behind Mark. He spun around. He shouldn't have stopped. The specter was going to catch him. Mark had run enough. Looking at the ground, he spotted one skeleton that seemed untouched by the madness. It had a rusted short sword lying inside its ribcage. So, Mark bent and grabbed the hilt of the weapon. A cavalryman bore down on the mercenary, but one of the lancers next to him caught the man's horse in the neck, piercing the carotid and showering the infantry in blood. The animal thudded to the ground, trapping the cavalryman's leg, so the mercenary danced around the flailing animal and stabbed the man in the chest before quickly moving on. The blow didn't kill the cavalryman right away. It wasn't intentional, just a bad strike, but it would do the job eventually. That was all that mattered. At the start of the battle, he would have stuck around to make sure nobody stole his XP, but after days of fighting, he'd ceased to care. As the mercenary searched for his next target, he spared a glance at the sky overhead, watching it explode in ever-increasing bursts of magic. Invisible protective domes shimmered on both sides as the opponents sought to overwhelm the defensive magic of their foes, and some of those shields did shatter and give way, fire and lightning bursting through to annihilate the troops underneath. But the mercenary couldn't think about that. The battle had stretched for days, and every day more mages arrived. Normally, if an army could field 5 or 6 magic users, the day would be theirs. This battle was different. As more and more countries took up arms, the stakes had grown until there were hundreds of mages on either side. The power that scorched the skies could have reshaped a continent, but the mercenary did his best to put that out of his mind and focus on his sword. Another kill, another paycheck. That was all that concerned him. That, and staying alive. An abrupt shimmer and warp ran through the air around the mercenary, his body bulging and retracting uncomfortably, but he kept moving forward. He'd learned his lesson the first time the warping happened, stopping in surprise and almost letting someone run him through as a result. Now those uncomfortable moments came so often that the mercenary barely spared them a thought. A byproduct of all the magic at play, he'd been told. Then the teller had taken an arrow through the neck, and the conversation sort of died. The air warped again, but this time it was stronger, and the ground heaved up as a great cracking filled the air. Screams tore from the throats of mages on both sides of the battle as wild energies careened off their bodies, writhing and combining in an unconstrained conflagration of mana. The most powerful of the mages shouted to their fellows to hold on, to contain the flow, but even they were sweating profusely. More than one of them cut off their own magic and fled. The mercenary watched, entranced, as the spasming bands of wild magic streamed out of the magic users, building in power until they... A short sword drove into the mercenary's belly, severing his diaphragm and cutting off his scream before it could form. He looked into the eyes of his killer and saw the same dispassionate professionalism that he had worn for 100 kills of his own. The eyes of a fellow mercenary. Then those mercenary eyes grew wild as the man's jaw distended into gross proportions and his skin stretched, great slabs of fat materializing beneath the surface where none had existed a moment before. What in the world? Then, a great shredding noise filled the air as the fabric of reality itself ripped, and the world around the mercenary devolved into madness. People broken and distorted, horses merging with their riders, infantrymen turning on their own troops and screaming as they killed, men turning into babies, babies turning into old men. Darkness, light, the sun rising and setting at the same time. Pure, unfiltered chaos. An agony burst inside the mercenary that was far beyond a wound of the flesh. Something inside him was being ripped away, and to his horror, he saw his tome appear in the air before him. The book spun as it pulled away from him, and while the mercenary could tell the same thing was happening all across the battlefield, his eyes were locked onto his own book. Something was tearing the mercenary's tome away, and if he didn't intervene, if he let his tome be taken from him, his soul would be gone forever. The mercenary propped himself up with one hand and grabbed the handle of the short sword protruding from his gut. Wrenching the blade halfway out, he stifled the pain and pushed the hilt down toward the ground.
I die free,
the mercenary spat. Then he pulled, driving the blade up under his ribcage and into his heart.
What the hell?
Mark shouted, jerking back to reality as he dropped the sword to the ground. Before he could process what he'd seen, the specter burst out of the gloom, its warped, shifting shape racing towards Mark the moment it caught sight of him. With no chance to run, Mark reflexively raised his makeshift staff like a shield, as though a rough branch he'd picked up off the forest floor could do anything to ward off a tormented and vengeful soul. The ghostly apparition flew straight through Mark's arm and grabbed Mark's head with its outstretched hands. Immediately, Mark's body started shaking, and he dropped to his knees. This wasn't like a seizure. Instead, it was as though his body was being racked by some primal force, and a chaotic stream of visions raced through his brain with such density that he nearly missed the pulling sensation at the center of his being. If Mark hadn't experienced that vision, he wouldn't have known that what he was feeling was his tome being forcibly extracted from his body. Nor would he have known the reason behind the desperate hunger that lurked within the specter's eyes.
No!
Mark roared. With a supreme effort, he forced his shaking muscles to lock down, pushing this invading entity away from him, away from his mind.
Get out of my head!
At first, the creature didn't budge, but something inside Mark shifted. The shaking of his muscles became a resonance, building in a power that transformed his physical movement into a wall of mental force that he threw at the creature, pushing it away. The apparition wailed as it inched away, its arms stretching out and trying to maintain a grip on Mark's head, but Mark never ceased in his assault. More specters emerged from the gloom, circling the combatants but unable to get closer than a few meters, the force of the battle keeping them at bay. Meanwhile, Mark kept pushing, forcing the specter away 1 centimeter at a time until it was completely free of Mark's head. He wasn't able to gain complete freedom, however. Unable to force the tortured soul beyond the extent of his arm, the spectral form continued to engulf Mark's staff and the hand that grasped it. Even that small touch was enough to drain Mark, and he knew that this battle couldn't continue forever. What he needed was a way to win. Plunging his other hand inside the specter, Mark gripped his staff with both hands and wrenched focus off himself and onto the apparition in front of him. Clamping down with his will, Mark mentally embraced the being's wild, shifting form and drove down on it, forcing its mad shifting to slow. The apparition went wild, flailing in panic, but Mark didn't relent. That resonance inside the specter felt familiar, as though it echoed something inside of him. Yet, as much as the resonance felt like a part of Mark, what was inside the specter felt alien. Something that had been forced upon the creature, fighting and distorting it into the twisted apparition it had become. While Mark didn't like the idea of kinship with a force that could twist souls into the haunted denizens of the fog, he knew that whatever tiny edge he had couldn't be wasted, no matter the implications. Left with no alternative, Mark grabbed onto that resonance and hammered it down on the specter. The scream that cut through the fog nearly deafened Mark, filling the air with a tormented wail as the specter's very being started to shred under Mark's onslaught. From every split that appeared in the fiber of the creature's soul, a massive power started to leak out, filling the air with crackling energy. Mark soon realized that even if he won this battle, if he didn't do something about the force that was building in the air, he would end up killing himself regardless. Desperately, Mark cast around for somewhere to direct that power. His first inclination was to use the ground as a sink, bleeding it off like surplus electricity, but he met with such resistance that it was more like pushing electricity through rubber. He tried again with the discarded arms and armor of the long-deceased soldiers, but was met again with the same rigid resistance. With all other options exhausted, Mark attempted to focus that surplus power on the last thing in the world he would have thought capable of handling such force: his crude wooden staff. To Mark's shock, the wood soaked up power like it was created for that purpose, absorbing so much of the specter's fracturing form that it began to hum beneath his hands. With his prospects for survival renewed, Mark once again bent his will against the creature before him. At some point, the creature's attempts to attack Mark transitioned into an effort to flee from him, but Mark was too lost in the battle to care, obsessed with the destruction of this creature that had tried to annihilate his very being. The specter's form began to distort as it broke apart, its shape stretching out until it completely surrounded the staff into which its essence was being drawn. Mark could sense the battle drawing to a climax, smell the ozone burning the air, feel his hands burning from within the writhing fire of the specter's destruction. Then, suddenly, there was a snapping crescendo and an abrupt blast of power as the creature exploded into a swirling miasma that crackled in the air. It lingered, then collapsed into Mark's staff, searing his hands as it sunk into the rough wood with a crackle of finality that left the staff thrumming with energy. The unshaved bark beneath Mark's hands began to blacken and smolder. He looked at the staff in horror as it started to vibrate, the power too much for a simple wooden branch to handle. Somehow, Mark needed to release that excess energy, but he had no idea how. All he knew for certain was that if he didn't find a way, he would be destroyed. In a fit of desperation, Mark raised the staff above his head and drove the butt into the ground, forcing all of the power out of the staff. It was only at the last moment that Mark remembered how unreceptive the ground had been to this kind of power. He also remembered what happened when you forced too much electricity through rubber. Shit. The earth buckled beneath Mark's feet as a spider web of cracks appeared in a 5-meter radius around him. Through every crack, a blistering white light shone forth, illuminating the swirling dome of fog in an aurora of fluorescent glow. Then the web collapsed, taking Mark with it. All was chaos. One moment Mark was falling. Then he was on his feet. Then he was falling again, only sideways. Then he was on his feet again. One of his hands had 11 fingers while his other was purple. Everything was twisted and changing, and with every moment, he felt the same wrenching he had felt in that long-dead mercenary's vision. Only 20 times worse. What the hell was happening? Mark's motion stopped, though the shifting of his body didn't, and he found himself standing in a rock tunnel that extended around a corner into darkness.
No, not darkness,
Mark thought. There was a dim, multi-hued light ahead. With no other option, he moved towards it. As Mark rounded the corner, he discovered something that nearly destroyed his mind. A distorted, twisting ball of power hovered in the air over a gigantic chasm. Its size defied comprehension. It could have been 1 meter wide or 1,000. Mark's brain was incapable of processing the scope of the thing. White light arced like electricity around the object, and occasionally a band of light would lance free and hit something, twisting and distorting it into 1,000 different possibilities before the object settled on a form completely at random. The result was a gigantic cave covered in all manner of colors, plants, substances, slimes, and even animals, although most of those were distorted messes that clearly hadn't survived for long. Once again, it was beyond Mark's comprehension. Despite the overwhelming oddness of the thing, something drew Mark to that orb of power. He couldn't quite explain it, other than to say that it was similar to the resonance he had felt with the specter, within himself, but on a massive scale. He didn't know whether he should be speaking to the thing or running away from it, but he found himself drawing closer regardless. Then Mark became aware of a sliding sensation, as though he were on a moving walkway. Looking at the ground beneath him, Mark realized he was moving toward the wildly fluctuating orb of blue power, but not of his own volition. It was too much. Dropping his staff, Mark turned and tried to sprint away, but it was useless. Regardless of his efforts, Mark continued his inexorable slide towards the orb and its chasm. Now panicked, Mark redoubled his efforts, only to trip when the back of his heel clipped a rock and he toppled to the ground. He rolled onto his stomach and clawed at the stone with his hands, but all he managed to do was tear his fingernails off and leave bloody stripes in his wake as he was dragged towards the ledge. When he finally did reach the lip of that fantastic chasm, he braced himself for a gut-wrenching drop, only to discover that instead of falling, he was pulled up into the air, hovering as he continued to be drawn towards that twisting orb of power. A shock of horror went through Mark when he realized what was happening. Then there was a bright light, a blast of acceleration, and he disappeared inside the orb. Angela pushed her way through yet another patch of dense brambles, stumbling over an unseen root and nearly face-planting into the dirt. Leaves and thorns broke off the plant and stuck raggedly to her clothes, but she ignored them, instead taking a moment to spit out cobwebs that had ensnared her face.
Ugh!
Angela groaned.
This is just the worst!
She dragged her fingers through her hair, hopelessly tugging at the knots that had formed over the last 2 days as she made her way to Pallmeyer. Or tried to, at any rate. She should have been able to follow the river, right? That should have been easy. Nope. Riverbanks didn't like to be nice and gentle for the entirety of their length. Instead, she'd been forced inland on more than one occasion, which meant that instead of a relatively clear space by the river, she had to deal with the dense, bramble-filled, thorny-assed, ankle-twisting spiderweb-in-the-face crap that grew inland, where everything wanted to either scratch her eyes out or hit her with some kind of contact irritant that made her skin itch and burn like hell. At least she'd picked up some kind of hiking skill and an endurance point, but so far it didn't seem to do a hell of a lot. Angela looked around to get her bearings, in the process spotting some tall green stalks growing near a tree stump. She sighed in resignation.
Better than nothing,
she muttered. Getting down on her hands and knees, She clawed at the dirt until she had exposed enough of the tuber to pull it free of the ground, then jammed it into her belt pouch without looking at it. She preferred to put it out of her mind until she was forced to eat it. Not that the thing was hideous. It was just that looking at it would make her think about the taste, and that would inevitably lead to dry heaving. Even the rabbit that tipped her off to the plant's edibility hadn't looked like it was enjoying the experience. A noise came through the forest, causing Angela to pause in her digging. It sounded like someone slowly letting the air out of a balloon, layered over the cracking and rustling of brush being broken. Given that this was Arenia and balloons were presumably not a thing, combined with the plaintive air to the noise, Angela realized it was the sound of an animal in trouble. For a moment, she considered not going to help. Gotta stay alive, right? But then she remembered that she was a druid. Or would be. Maybe. If things turned out. Regardless, if she was going to pursue that path, she could hardly ignore the sound of an animal struggling in the woods.
Fine, I'm coming. Hold your horses,
Angela muttered. She pulled the last tuber out of the ground and shoved it into her belt, then made her way through the dense foliage to the source of the noise. More brambles got caught in her hair and clothes, but she gritted her teeth and kept moving forward, trying to ignore the godforsaken things. When Angela finally came upon the source of the noise, she discovered that it was a deer in the middle of a clearing, its foreleg caught in a hunter's trap. The leg was pretty mangled from all the struggling, and even though the trap was likely meant for smaller animals, it had done enough damage that the deer would probably die of sepsis if it escaped. Or a predator would eat it, more likely.
Hey there, little buddy,
Angela said in a soothing tone.
Everything's going to be okay, yeah? You just let me come over there and help you.
She made her way slowly across the clearing toward the deer. Its tail twitched, and it looked at her nervously, but it didn't move. Once Angela was close enough, she slowly got to one knee and bent to investigate the trap. It wasn't too complicated, kind of like what you would see in a cartoon. Before long, she worked out how the thing operated. Using her body weight, Angela pressed down on the levers to either side of the trap's jaws. With the metal no longer binding its leg, the deer gingerly removed its injured hoof and hopped tentatively away from the trap, completely unable to put any weight on the injured limb.
Easy there, fella,
Angela said.
I'm going to give you something special to close that wound right up, okay?
Angela removed a sprig of mistletoe from her pouch and held it in her hand. She then used the blood on her hand from where she'd removed the trap to gently draw her rune just above the deer's shredded leg. Satisfied that her rune was good, Angela held the mistletoe to the center circle of the rune and focused on drawing in the forest's vitality. This time, though, she directed that power not into herself, but into the rune, willing it to life so that it could perform its magic and heal the deer's leg. Once the connection was made, the rune started to glow slightly. Its magic seemed to separate from Angela, no longer needing her as a conduit to draw on the forest's vitality. Angela watched as the wound sealed itself shut, leaving behind smooth, scar-free flesh. Soon, both the sprig of mistletoe and the rune itself glowed a soft red and then crumbled into dust, signifying the end of the spell.
This is why I wanted to be a druid.
Angela's heart filled with joy. The deer looked at her curiously now, but Angela knew in her heart that it was thankful for the aid she had given it. With a loving hand, Angela reached out and placed her palm gently on the deer's neck. As soon as her hand made contact, the deer's eyeballs went wide and it reared up on its hind legs like a horse in a slap fight with a kangaroo. Angela had no time to react. Before she could even cry out, the deer leapt, made a complete 180-degree turn, planted its front legs in the dirt, and delivered a 2-hoofed hind leg kick directly to her chest that launched her through the air and sent her smashing into a tree trunk on the other side of the clearing. Angela lay groaning in the dirt as she watched the deer bound off into the woods.
You motherfucker,
she wheezed. She tried to grab a pebble to throw at the animal, only to discover that her arm now possessed an unexpected joint in the middle of her forearm. She shouted, clutching her broken arm and rocking back and forth.
Stupid fucking animals in the stupid fucking forest on the stupid fucking planet!
She looked skyward and shouted,
This planet sucks!
Gritting her teeth, Angela forced her way back to her feet. Something was definitely grinding against something inside her arm, but at least it hadn't broken through the skin. There was also something super shitty going on with her ribs. It helped to know that she could heal herself once her spell was off cooldown, but it's not like that made it hurt any less. Furious at the outcome of her attempt at being a good little druid, Angela picked up her shillelagh and staggered in the direction of the river, swearing every step of the way. Her grumbling and swearing were still going strong when she rounded a tree and was surprised by a stocky gray creature, the beast spinning to face her. Its mouth opened wide as it delivered a sharp-toothed hiss, waving its long-taloned paws at her threateningly, the hair on its back rising with an air of menace. Without a moment's hesitation, Angela swung her shillelagh at the thing, smashing the weapon down on the creature's head and killing it with a single blow.
You have slain a level 2 terrified juvenile badger.
Congratulations on the cold-hearted murder of an animal that mostly eats worms. I'm sure Anad will be super happy about that.
25 XP earned. New weapon skill learned. Clubs, skill level 1. Tier 0.
Again, congrats on clubbing to death the animal equivalent of an 11-year-old child.
50 XP earned.
Oops, Angela said. A rumble of thunder sounded in the sky, and she waved sheepishly skyward.
Sorry about that. It's just that it caught me by surprise, and I was already in a bad mood because of the deer thing, and in my defense it looked pretty dangerous. I mean, it doesn't now. Now it looks pretty small. Like, really small.
She nudged it with her foot. Yeah, the thing was definitely a juvenile. She briefly considered whether it would be okay to skin and eat it.
No, you're a vegetarian, you idiot.
Still, she was freaking hungry.
No.
Angela turned her back on the corpse and headed toward the burbling of the river, which had finally seen fit to announce its presence. Wait, was she supposed to bury the badger or something?
Meh. Something will come along and eat it. Circle of life and all that.
When Angela arrived at the river, she discovered that for once, she had been in luck. Her detour had taken her far enough downstream to avoid the rocky outcropping that forced her away from the riverbank earlier. Now the water was accessible by simply hopping along a few rocks. Angela made her way to where the water was running clear and shallow and opened up her pouch to make sure nothing had fallen out during the encounter with the deer. Fortunately, everything was accounted for.
Small miracles, I guess,
Angela muttered. Still, if she'd lost the vegetables, it would at least spare her from having to eat them. Kneeling on the rock, Angela took out one of the tubers and resigned herself to an awkward one-handed washing experience. Maybe she could rub them in the smooth gravel to clean them off? That should be pretty easy. She leaned forward to get the tuber down to the bottom of the water, only to discover that the refraction of the light in the water had made it seem much shallower than it truly was. A fact she discovered by leaning in too far, slipping off the rock, and falling sideways into the glacier-fed water. Angela didn't even bother moving. There was no point. Instead, she simply lay there dejectedly as the water ran past, halfway up her body. For a moment, she considered dunking her face and sucking all the water she could into her lungs. But she instead opted to roll onto her back and stare at the clouds overhead. Without thinking, she took a bite of the starchy tuber and winced as the taste of turnip and battery acid filled her mouth.
Why is it that the worst-tasting thing in this forest is the only thing I've found that's edible?
Closing her eyes, Angela forced herself to endure the meal. Chew, swallow, repeat. Chew, swallow, repeat.
I wonder if that badger is still there.
The turkey raced through the woods in utter panic. Hairy creatures on 2 legs tried to grab her, but she scrambled away, looping between their legs and out of their grasp. The turkey lost a couple of tail feathers in the process, but that was a lot better than losing her head. The hairy 2-legged creatures made loud noises, sort of like the wrinkly creature that had caught her before she ended up in this forest, but different. The turkey took advantage of the hairy 2 legs' confusion and darted into the bushes, racing through the ground cover as she tried to get away. It was strange and springy, not like the warehouse she had grown up in, but the turkey liked the bounciness. The plants seemed to keep the 2-legged things from catching it as well, which was a benefit she had come to appreciate. When the shouts died to nothing, the turkey stopped to peck at some seeds. Then she stopped, her head perking up. The feeling had returned. Without really knowing why, the turkey felt compelled to move towards the feeling. Sure, the wrinkly 2 legs was the reason she was in this forest, but he had let her go instead of eating her like everything else tried to do. That had to count for something.